What's up, everyone? We are here today with Brandon Amalani. Brandon, I've said your last name wrong about 1,000 times. I'm talking to people. I'll say Alamani, like I'll pronounce it wrong all these different ways. So I'm glad it's written right there for me. I think because for so many years everyone mispronounced my last name, and I kind of didn't care about last names anymore. So I
Yeah,
apologize, but I got it right that time.
no, I don't.
You
I
know,
don't either. I don't really care. It's all good. It's very vowel heavy, so I understand.
it is. But dude, Pump could finally make this happen. So for everyone who obviously doesn't know, we tried to make this happen multiple times, and like my power is out, the electrical work wasn't working, the studio wasn't ready. It was like building, building, building. Then the one day it didn't work, we talked on the phone for like 2 hours, and it was so much fun. We're like, let's just recreate that kind of scenario where it's just a conversation and see where it takes us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate the invite for the call, and yeah, it's been a long time coming.
It has been, man. So let's kind of backtrack because I actually don't know your history, your origin story, any of that stuff. Before we get to the products and all that kind of cool stuff, where did you actually begin with everything?
Yeah, it's for sake of brevity, I mean, it's a very long story. I actually started out as a musician, and I thought that's what I was going to do when I was a teenager and growing up. And my mom was actually body worker, and my dad was actually electrical engineer. So I was exposed to those types of things early on. And while I was, being a musician and doing my thing, and as a teenager, I was really into like studying philosophy, like Eastern philosophy, Taoist philosophy, and stuff like that. And then I got connected with this group that did at the time, it was kind of like Reiki, hands-on healing. They were into these kind of like energy modalities. Some people would consider it more along the lines of the metaphysical side of things. And I ended up seeing kind of a lot of cool transformations from this type of idea of like life force, using your mind to actually heal the body and create a field effect that entrains the body to kind of normalize. And but what I would also notice is that people would come back 2-3 weeks later with the same issues, the same patterns. So that led me down this path of like exploring like nutrition and dietary approaches, which led me to like traditional Chinese medicine from a Japanese lineage, because I developed some relationships there and created the company Shin Blossom. And for a long time, I was really kind of, and still am in that modality where it's, the 5 element theory, that traditional herbalism lineage, they look at the body more full spectrum than allopathic Western medicine. They look at the energetic, emotional, physical, psychic, etheric bodies that we, these observations that we can see over time. And, I thought that was pretty holistic. And I thought it was really cool that, they created a system called the 5 element theory, which is really awesome in the sense because when you can put complex ideas that are multifaceted and full spectrum into like archetypes, it's easier to remember how these constructive wave interference, destructive wave interference of these patterns or these phases in our body and our organ systems actually work and connect. So fast forward, I ended up becoming a father, having kids, and it's always been in the back of my mind. I've always played with like Q-links and all the old school like EMF type technologies, but I've just never really found anything that had any like really teeth to it as far as like EMF protection. So I guess making a really long story short, I was introduced to Blue Shield by an acupuncturist colleague of mine. And he was like, yeah, we're seeing these weird results. Like these people actually have these like Herxheimer reaction type detoxification effects, but and they just don't feel great for the first few days, at least this one client. And but their organ system, traditional pulse diagnostic, kind of how they operate within a TCM structure, all the organ systems were communicating better. They had more phase coherence within their, meridian system. And it was just like, wow, okay, that's interesting. And then I looked at the technology, which is Blue Shield, and they were actually showing results with like on the chicken farm and cows so I'm just like, okay, well that nullifies the psychosomatic aspect because, animals don't know what's going on. So I talked with one of the co-inventors and got to know him, kind of peek behind the scenes of what's going on with it. And I just got really fascinated with some of these kind of like lesser known, more esoteric energy modalities, but have its roots in like our history with like Tesla and Dollard and Steinmetz and all these guys. So long story short, went from traditional Chinese medicine, creating Shin Blossom, to operating blueshield.com and just working on developing my own energy devices. So therapeutic EMF, not just focusing on the bad EMF, quote unquote, which there's no good or bad EMF, but there's coherent EMF and incoherent EMF. And just like trying to teach about those distinctions and how to understand how magnetism and electromotive force affects our physiology.
I love it. So I think maybe, okay, everyone kind of knows who you are, where you're coming from, background, all that cool stuff. Before we get into the devices specifically, I don't think I've heard a podcast out there or really many resources on breaking down everything from a scalar field, transverse, longitudinal wave, like really like the basics of all these things. Then we'll get into the rotational magnetic fields and like everything. So let's kind of start there, like the basics. When you're first introducing these energetic therapies to people and trying to talk about coherent versus non-coherent EMFs, where do you usually begin?
Well, I usually kind of start with Dollard's framework. Basically, like when we look at electromagnetism, the electromagnetic spectrum, this is the measurable, visible force vectors that we see in nature, right? So the magnetodielectric is interesting because if we look at the laws of thermodynamics, like energy can't be created or destroyed. So we create a bunch of electrical potential, like say with a Therapy where we're creating like 500,000 volts of electrostatic potential. Where does that all go? So one thing that I like, a term I like to use a little bit more than like ether, which ether, if we kind of go back to the old timers, like Tesla's day, they would talk about ether as basically a medium. It's an interconnected medium that's everywhere and nowhere. It connects all things. And I like to use the term counter space. So we have space, which is basically like the manifest of potential energy, which is centrifugal magnetic divergence. And then we have the opposite, which is centripetal inertial convergence. So we're actually moving more towards counter space. So there's charge and charge collapse. And it's this kind of flux that happens that stabilizes and has this coupling effect that really reflects all the way down through physiology, the macrocosm and the microcosm, as far as how like membranes, magnets, all this kind of stuff polarizes and stabilizes these field charges and fluxes that keep us alive, essentially. So essentially what I start with is like understanding that we're first electromagnetic before we're chemical. Because the chemistry wouldn't even actually work if we didn't have these like proton gradients and these electromagnetic gradients across cell membranes and mitochondria functioning optimally. We wouldn't be able to like, have these redox potentials and stuff coming in, stuff moving out, detox, nutrition, all this kind of stuff. So when we talk about, there's a couple, okay. When we talk about like the whole picture, there's a lot of terms that get conflated. And so what I want to start with is like counter space, which is like the ether. So there's a substrate, and we're going to kind of break down the whole cycle, and I'll go pieces and parts, and we'll kind of pick this thing apart. So we have this potential that's there. It's formless. It's the predecessor. It's antecedent to all psychophysicality, all electromagnetism. It's the potential that makes manifest possible, if that makes sense. So you have this ether that condenses down to light. Light breaks down into hydrogen, and hydrogen is basically in everything. It's basically, you can look at everything on the periodic table, for example, and everything is compounded hydrogen. So that's a big deal, because once you understand that everything gets heavier and heavier and more dense and then decays back into ether, that's the cycle. And I actually have some little kid teaching tools.
Well, let's see it.
So when we talk about magnetodielectric, there's a conjugate geometry that happens. So people have heard of torsion fields or a toroid, and that's basically like this. So we have this magnetic field, and I don't know if I could squeeze this down, but in the middle, you'll see an empty space, right? So this is like a toroid, if I'm in the shot at all.
That looks good.
So this is centrifugal magnetic divergence. So this is potentiality. So in between that, we have the hyperboloid, which looks like an hourglass shape, right? So we have basically energy fluxing in electromagnetically and then basically decaying or creating charge collapse out. And this little spot right here is the dielectric inertial plane. So this is lowest simplex pressure mediation. So when we're creating when we get into scalar energy, we're talking about two different things. So there's a scalar, which in physics is basically a mass and magnitude with no time component, no force vector, no direction. Basically, there's no polarization to it. It's just kind of omnidirectional. So 39 degrees is a scalar, or 39 miles is a scalar. However, when you add a time component to it, it's 39 miles an hour. That's a cyclical thing. So that's when we get into transverse electromagnetism. So it has so many cycles per second. So how fast is it oscillating? So that's oscillating. So we're talking about a scalar field. We're talking about a longitudinal, non-oscillating electromagnetic pulse perturbation of the medium itself, the ether, the lowest simplex pressure mediation. So we're basically creating this charge collapse, which creates a null phase emission, which means like all oscillations have phase, right? And we're very phase sensitive. We have all these oscillatory systems happening all the time, all these regulatory processes, and there's a natural impedance. This is why a lot of frequency generators can work and some don't work, because it doesn't really factor in the edge noise and how our body perceives. You can create a perfect 10 hertz sine wave, for example. But once it goes through the densities of the tissue and the fascia and the mitochondria and all this kind of stuff, it doesn't necessarily translate to 10 hertz. Does that make sense? Like how it interfaces with the body?
It does. It does. And real quick, let me pause you just for a second. Make sure everyone's kind of following along with everything we're saying here, because if you don't have a background in the terminology, you kind of get lost, right? So we're kind of bringing it back to ether, energy, consuming everything, right? That's where everything's starting. That's where everything ending. It's that cyclical process. As we get into the differences in those fields, one's more time dependent, one is not. One doesn't have anything to do with time. It's irrelevant in the superluminal space and that conversation side of things. So as we're kind of going deeper now into, do we want to look at how that, not just from like an earth and like a universal based aspect, but also from like a cellular aspect, how that kind of all interconnects?
Yeah. So that's an interesting analogy I came up with, and this is like not scientifically proven or anything, but this is kind of just my view on it after studying this stuff for years. Like when you create a scalar potential, and this is kind of, I digressed a little bit with all the analogies and everything, but basically what we're doing is we're taking out of phase signals and creating a 0 point, meaning like we're creating a null phase, meaning nothing's there. But just because it's nothing doesn't mean it's doing anything. This is what the old timers were talking about with like a
explain that. Yeah. Go deeper into that, because I think the 0 point conversation is so misunderstood or just not talked about properly.
Yeah, because it's unmanifest. There's no way to tangibly measure like what's actually happening with these like null phase emissions. We just know that there's biological effects. So my understanding of it currently is that when we utilize high voltage potential and we create a dielectric acceleration, if you look at a dielectric, there's a dielectric, which is a substance that holds charge and separates charge potential. So there's the material aspect, but from a field theory perspective, it's the potentiality again that like basically makes all this electromagnetic stuff manifest. So our bodies act like a dielectric medium when we're in these fields, and also like a nonlinear capacitor. So we can maintain charge within the dielectric membranes of our body, which is physics. It's the mitochondria, the cell membranes are doing this all the time. It's very much like a magnet. So when we're creating this field effect, in my understanding, I look at the whatever they call ether, counter space, whatever name you want to put on it. I think there's an inherent intelligence. If everything is fractal and recursive, meaning like all these patterns repeat, we can look at the body, we can look at observable nature and assume or infer that basically like this kind of stuff is happening on the subatomic level. And what we see here is like, okay, well, if I cut myself, body knows how to heal it. I don't have to consciously think, oh, send growth factors and send macrophages and clean this up and do all this stuff. You don't have to consciously focus on that. It's in your blueprint. It's in your DNA. Your body just knows how to self-correct and self-organize. So when we stimulate with scalar or any ether perturbation modality, we're actually, I think, allowing the ether itself, the medium that holds everything together, to retransmit, recode, and restructure everything within that field perturbation sphere. And that's kind of like a DNA reset of the ether, which basically has a restructuring thing through everything from the subatomic all the way up to what we can see in visible reality. And to me, that makes a lot of sense as far as like how a scalar potential can actually induce the body's own innate coupling to itself, meaning you're removing all the noise, the signal ratio, you're going down to 0, and the body can self-correct basically, and it can reorganize basically.
So I personally prefer to call it ether, just because I grew up watching Lord of the Rings and reading the books, and it sounds to me more like Middle Earthy. So I kind of like the ether word; it just sounds cooler to me, right?
Yeah.
I think it's super cool because if you kind of rewind everything you said, right, and if everyone's following along properly, we have this universal energetic potential that encompasses everything, kind of does everything, recycles everything. Periodic table of elements is just, it's all these different allotropes that are moving in different densities, and they can phase change back and forth. Like it's not a stagnant. It's not like the table's the table, right? It's always changing in phase, and we get into water later on. But regardless, you look at this ether, energy for everyone, right? Energy for absolutely everything. It almost doesn't matter if it can't be actualized. That's the potential portion side of it. That's where we have the physical body. If we didn't have the physical body, we would just technically be that energy, which would be that ether. So we have this physical manifestation to kind of show that that energy has to exist. And your example of the cells that can heal themselves is the perfect example, Like you can't have that if there wasn't that innate intelligence of cells to do these things by themselves. Because if not, could you imagine thinking about every process you have to do? My heart's got to beat, this neuron has to fire, prefrontal cortex has to
Yeah.
hypertrophy. Oh no, I took this supplement, I got to atrophy the prefrontal cortex. Like it couldn't happen. It really couldn't happen. So there has to be something out there energetically, and you can say ether, you can say counter space, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing that's basically governing, dictating, and controlling everything. And then we're trying to basically show it off and find some way to harness it to help our biology. Because we've gotten kind of so far away from that. The more technology we have and the more we become like advanced humans, I think we've kind of de-evolved in a lot of ways because we're kind of moving away from those basic connections that is really the connection to the ether, to the universe, and to just universal energy. And so I think that's where all this electromagnetic therapy really comes in, kind of just to get us back to where we were supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I have kind of more of a full spectrum approach to EMF protection. Because if you think about everything we're doing, whether it's like peptides or hormones or electromagnetic radiation, it's all signals, right? And it's stimulating our body in a certain way. And all of these force vectors, any manifestation of the torsion field, that use of inertial or rest energy is actually, that's basically what we're talking about is like, how do we reset homeostasis here? Because all this stuff, our reference signal is nature. That's what we've evolved with. And, when we look at it from a signal perspective, the body does everything, meaning like you can inject yourself with whatever, you can consume herbs, you can do all this kind of stuff, but those are just signals, but the body does the work, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I think we've said this off air talking multiple times. I said it to so many people, like in the perfect world, I would take no supplements, no peptides, no hormones. Like we wouldn't need these things, but we've just gotten so far. We've lost that signal, lost that connection. And so we kind of honestly absolutely need them now until we can get back to that space. And I think certain people, like you have those gifted people out there where you hear the crazy stories, right? And those people just can do that already. They're automatically more evolved than we are. And so they don't need the supplements. They can take the LSDs and not have any changes at all to physiology. Like everyone's heard those stories. And until you talk to those individuals or see it firsthand, you kind of can't believe it. And you see it and go, wow, I got to really kind of rethink reality almost, right?
Yeah. And a lot of it comes to training. And that's why I think our mind is still the most valuable asset, because that is potential. Like you can't move your body without intention first. And intention is a superluminal energy, in my opinion. It's faster than the speed of light. It's consciousness it's everywhere and nowhere. Our body is kind of like a magnet. It's a conjugate circuit. And what's interesting about this is that all force vectors are tethered to ground. So how do we feel more grounded? When we feel more grounded, we feel better, right? So we actually it's about stabilization and coherence. And that's where we kind of have to have a multimodality approach, in my opinion, when we're dealing with stress from just life, being dopamine hacked from social media, from electromagnetic radiation, from transients on the house, from the dirty electricity. All of these things are influencing us constantly. Like you're saying, we're not in a very natural environment. And if we were, we'd be able to do the meditation training, all this kind of stuff, and utilize our best asset, which is our cognitive focus. And, I used to study a lot of internal martial arts and external martial arts. And there's this kind of idea of like becoming song or relaxed and like basically letting chi and everything move. And when we're doing acupuncture, when we're doing body work, we're really allowing flow to happen. And a lot of this kind of mental stress, a lot of toxins, a lot of these things that we're exposed to that we're talking about that we're having to kind of remedy are creating these blockages within our circuits in our body endogenously. And, there's ways to utilize mental practices and focus and intention, and everything cycles between yin and yang. And great examples, like when you get a cold or flu and you become imbalanced, what happens? You create a fever, you get hot, you get yang, and then you get cold and chills, and you go back and forth and you cycle until you kind of reach that still point and that balance of that homeostasis. If you were to cut off circulation to your finger, you'd start feeling, oh, wow, that's getting warm. It's getting hot, and then pins and needles, and then it gets cold, and then it goes back and forth. You can kind of see these patterns throughout nature. And it's this kind of this natural ability for the body to kind of maintain homeostasis.
So let's take one step back, right? I like the direction we're going in, but I don't want to get into subatomic particle conversations yet. Let's take one step back and go back to definitions for longitudinal waves, scalar waves, and transverse waves, because you and me can kind of might out talk some people, and I want to make sure everyone can understand things. So if we are doing this in terms of comparison, right, to longitudinal, scalar, transverse, let's look at in terms of what we're getting from our technology, like our computers right now, compared to the blue shield, compared to nature. So people can really understand what these waves really mean and go into the phase conjugation and all those processes.
So yeah, and then there's different modes of these longitudinal and transverse electromagnetic. So it gets very complicated, obviously. But just to simplify things, I grab my pen here just as an analogy. So when we talk about a transverse electromagnetic, we're creating an oscillation between the electric and magnetic, and that's creating a time component where it's cycling. You've heard of hertz. Hertz are cycles per second. So how many oscillations, and you can have different waveforms, like you can have a sine wave, a square wave, a triple sawtooth, a trapezoidal wave. It doesn't matter the how many times that oscillates between electric and magnetic, because they're interconnected. You can't really separate electricity and magnetism. We do to a significant degree. It's not totally separated, but when we talk about like Therapy being a dielectric accelerator, meaning it creates a counterspatial vortex centripetally, and we talk about magnetism, which is creating that toroidal use of inertial energy to create charge and charge mobilization. That's on the electromagnetic spectrum. With longitudinal, there's examples of longitudinal energy that are not even related to scalar. And if you think about like an energy input on this side, the oscillations move in the direction of the force. So basically, when I push here, it's almost instantaneous. And that's what Tesla was really trying to tell us. He's like, this transverse electromagnetic stuff is super inefficient, you guys. We should really be focusing on this dielectric potential. So you have a string here between you and me, and I vibrate it on this side, and it takes X amount of minutes, seconds, hours to get to you, and that's cycles per second transverse electromagnetism. Longitudinal energy is a compression and refraction. So you can have nodes along a sine wave that's transverse and have these compression and refraction nodes within that as waves intersect with all of the different energy fields, creating null field effects and potentially scalar potentials. And that's what Maxwell's theories and equations were like alluding to. So, and you can look at the example of like a drum, like a diaphragm. So if you hit it, it's a compression and refraction, right? So it creates a longitudinal. If I hit this wall here, they'll hear it on the other side. That pressure wave is basically going through the wall. So that's a mechanical longitudinal wave from that perspective. So when we create something like with the Therapies is a great example, because it's like the perfect electrotherapy instrument to kind of demonstrate this, is that he basically created a biphasic air core transformer, like based on Tesla's work, with a primary and secondary coil, and basically counter-rotating these vortices of plasma. And as they intersect, they phase conjugate and basically create charge collapse and go like take a 500,000 volts and go into counter space. Your body in that field creates basically a closed loop. So it closes the circuit, and it's constantly balancing for zero. So it brings everything that, and we think emotionally, mentally as well, brings everything down to like this 0 point to where your body can recorrect itself because it doesn't have any interference. So it can conductively couple to itself endogenously, which is super cool. So hopefully that kind of gives people an idea of like longitudinal versus transverse electromagnetic. And another analogy I like to use, because the ocean is just such a great example. Like if you were to be on the ocean on a boat and it's very still, let's say it's a calm ocean, and then you have tectonic plates bump into each other, you might not feel anything at that boat level. This is this huge impact, this huge force that creates this longitudinal underneath this pressure that eventually creates the transverse magnetic, which is the waves. So they're kind of interconnected in that way. It's a simplex analogy and not quite perfect, but it kind of shows the direction of what I'm trying to say is like when you might not feel a whole lot at the 0 point, because that's the origin of this like major dielectric concentration and release of energy, but then you see the transverse electromagnetic after the fact. So potentiality, actuality.
Now so then the correlation into scalar, right? So if people are starting to understand, okay, transverse, longitudinal, how it applies to like basic everyday life, natural phenomenon, things like that, where does scalar then come in? Because I think that's a big, I think the misunderstanding is that all scalar is coherent, right? Which I think kind of gets said a lot, at least what I hear. And so like from a scalar aspect, how do you generally tend to explain that to people?
Well, yeah, scalar, again, like EMF, it's not good or bad. It's all about how it's created, how it's transmitted, and how it's potentially imprinted. So we got to think of it different. Like when you have a carrier signal on a transverse electromagnetic wave, you can modulate that. You can have carrier frequencies. That's how cell towers work. So I call you, I send a voice text, I send a video on there. It's basically modulating the signal. So all that informational carrier wave is carrying the information, the video, the text, the voice call, and that's where the noise and incoherence affects our body. So when we talk about like scalar, if you create, let's say you have the two waves analogy that are out of phase and they're going like this and they cancel each other out, that null phase emission, just because it's nothing doesn't mean it's no thing. That what they call a standing wave, that can actually be imprinted on, meaning informational fields can be imprinted on. It's still potentiality. It's still not a frequency itself. It's the source of frequencies, but it can have information. And that's what Tesla was like really kind of experimenting with a lot is, and what Dollard was talking about is like, you can actually encode these scalar fields with energy. And that's why they were working so hard on, working with telluric waves and all this kind of stuff with the Warrenclyffe Tower, and like basically sending electromagnetic stimulus down the earth and bouncing these telluric waves off to get like wireless energy that still can be coherent enough to actually carry your signal, but it basically doesn't have the time variable. So it's really interesting. Scalar, again, it's not something that's like, it's so highly theoretical because you can't measure it. We're just kind of like inferring that, but what in science isn't inferred? Electron theory, particle theory came a lot later, and they're starting to kind of backtrack on that more than people think. Like, it's not just a bunch of billiard balls and BBs like running down wires. It's more of a field effect modality. It's a rate of induction. So, and that explains things like wireless induction in a vacuum. Like, if there was actually everything was dependent on this field effect with all these electrons like bouncing around, you wouldn't be able to induce a signal into a vacuum because there's no electrons to like kind of carry the information into that medium. So it's really interesting because nature and electricity is a lot stranger than we understand, and I don't think we honestly have it all figured out.
Yeah, not even close, right? I think the atom's a good example, right? So you have nucleus, protons, like, okay, they made up the energetic field that's supposed to keep it in there, because you have technical electrons. It's a probability 50% there, 50% not, out in that field, right? How is it just not being attracted? They're supposed to be attracted. How is that nucleus actually containing those? It doesn't quite make sense. And I think a lot of people, I think everyone's now kind of changing their tune on that. Like, oh, maybe we don't know what an atom is. Maybe we don't quite fully understand the periodic table and all the things we're mentioning. And let's go into scalar deeper, right? Because I think everyone hears this because it sounds amazing, right? It sounds absolutely phenomenal. You can't measure it, but you see the biological effects, which I think are amazing. But technologically behind the scenes, from circuit board to photon emission to diodes, like all that stuff, to me, and I'm sure to you, it seems, I don't want to say basic, but like it's kind of been around for a while. It's getting better. It's kind of been around for a while. Could you explain the mechanics? Like if you go into, like, actually right now, I got my EVO right here. Because I'm out here and I have the actual EVO pyramid inside. I got to get one for out here in this recording studio, actually. But if you were to open that up and look at how small the circuitry is, break down what it looks like, what's in there, and how it actually works.
Yeah, it's not an analog system. So the way we get the complexity of that charge collapse is it's all happening on a microprocessor, and light is the modality. So if you look at LEDs, there's like a crystalline membrane on them, and basically the inventor called it crystal photonics. So what you're doing is you're creating charge collapse and simultaneously imprinting like frequencies. Of course, when it transmits, you're looking for the end phase effect. You're not looking at frequencies at that point, but it allows things to modulate and phase shift enough to where the body never gets used to it. So what's happening is you got the controller, microprocessor is doing the signal charge collapse, scalar potential, and then the light, the photonic emission is actually what's broadcasting it into the room, creating and really what you're doing is it's an ether perturbation modality. So we're creating a stimulus in the environment to where the body is phase sensitive to this kind of stuff, far more sensitive than to transverse electromagnetics. Because remember, you have a lot of transverse oscillatory systems happening all the time, and these modalities using scalar potential seem to be efficacious, at least in the clinical trial stuff that we've done, because the body seems to be far more sensitive to these type of informational fields than transverse electromagnetics. So that's more or less the shorthand of what's going on within the circuit.
I like it. And I'm sure you can't answer this, but there's a couple things I've actually wanted to ask you. I know certain things are proprietary, but that actual algorithm from a bioenergetic aspect in terms of the signal you're putting on to be sent out. So I understand that it's always going to be cyclicking like in nature. I understand you are probably following phi ratios, sacred geometry, things of that nature. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm not sure what you can and can't say, but that initial signal you're putting on to make that a coherent signal, what can you say about that? Because I think that's like obviously the coolest part of it, but obviously what makes it different than everything else.
Yeah, there are definitely some proprietary aspects, but generally what we've always openly talked about is that you have to follow nature's principles if you're going to create something that's going to be useful long term and healthy. The analogy I always use is like I have a very elaborate, kind of like you, I have a very elaborate water system in my house. I try my best to create spring water, but to mimic the whole hydrological cycle that's happened for thousands of years, it just seems kind of silly that you can take like a 12-foot area of your house and like make spring water, right? But we do what we can, and it has benefits, and it's clearly better than like drinking like chemical fluoridated like tap water that's unstructured. So with these with this type of technology, it's not like super strong. We're creating enough of a perturbation to stimulate the body, but we don't want really like high voltage systems. And if you were to take what Blue Shield can do from an algorithmic perspective, it, and do it analog, it would be just a massive device to kind of run everything that's happening. So when we talk about like what is it, what is happening on the circuit, it's basically taking principles of coherence and randomization. So we have everything changing. Everything in nature is always changing. The sunlight, the light frequencies throughout the day are constantly changing. They're stable. Our body understands it. If you take everything in nature, insects, microflora, like animals, birds, wind through trees, ocean waves, you're going to see that like, and associate a frequency or a timing with it. It's very complex. It's like all over the place, and it has this like natural phase shift where ocean waves are probably the best examples. Like they roll in, it's not the same cadence. It's not repetitive. So nothing in nature is really repetitive. So we have to kind of honor that principle when we're creating an algorithm, that because otherwise it's like doing the same 10 push-ups every day. You'll get really good at those 10 push-ups, but it won't like drive any kind of like growth or anything like that. So we have that, and then we have the phi ratio mathematics, which is self-evident in everything in nature. It's the fractal geometry. So when we talk about phi ratio, not a lot of people really understand that, but that's basically a mathematical proportionality of everything in nature. And it's basically, if you look at the Lichtenberg, these fractals, mycelium, lightning strikes, everything from decay to growth follows this phi ratio pattern. So we have to have that kind of math inside of the algorithm, but we take all of this in a particular way and like create this 0 point, and everything kind of gets imprinted and basically creates this omnidirectional flux. So it's kind of in and out. We used to have it to where the algorithm was on for 5 or 6 seconds and then off for 30 seconds and like in breath, out breath. But ever since like 5G kind of came along, we had a carrier that's basically on all the time that's interrupted with that original algorithm. So it's a little bit more advanced than the modern setup.
So basically, you could think about it like nature in your pocket. It's like the EVO portable in terms of the frequencies it's giving off to make you in a more coherent state, right?
Well, in a sense, I mean, it's like saying like, is your home water system spring water? Not really, but what it is, it's a coherent reference signal that your body preferentially prefers to tune into it. And the best analogy I've been able to come up with is like a radio station, right? Like your cells are, all of your cells in your body are little transceivers, and we're communicating with the environment. We're sending out biophotonic energy from our body, and we're also like, interpreting energy from the environment. So when we look at it from that perspective, our body's always interacting, and it's one of those things where it's like, it's not perfect, but it basically is a dominant reference signal that your body preferentially wants to tune into. And this goes back to like Dr. Bruce Lipton's work as far as looking at cells in a petri dish without human influence, because the human mind is tuned to the human cell, right? It can influence things. So they set cameras and they put a beneficial substance on one side of the petri dish and toxic substance on the other. And in every case, the cells would always migrate towards what's beneficial. And this is important knowledge because it demonstrates objectively that the cells have an internal, basically like an intelligence. So when we think of the radio analogy, it's like your cells can only pay attention to one radio station. So what you're doing is when you dial in your radio station, there's a carrier signal, the information song comes in, and it basically transmits through these pressure waves we call sound waves, and you can hear it. It doesn't mean all the other radio stations aren't bouncing around the radio, the airwaves. They certainly are, but you're tuned into this. So basically you can think of it like a tuner. So Blue Shield kind of tunes your cells into a certain thing. And what we found, at least this is our analysis of it, is that the body tends to mount an immune response to non-native electromagnetic radiation because it's incoherent, it's chaotic, it messes with our endogenous signaling through the voltage gated calcium channels. And, we're basically giving the body something else to pay attention to so it doesn't spin its wheels. And that's where, it's a small percentage, like 20-25% might get like a Herxheimer reaction where they feel a little lower energy when they introduce Blue Shield, and they're kind of like, what's going on? And then it normalizes, and then you have like a new normal, new baseline, because your body has all this stuff to work on all the time. It only has so much immune energy to prioritize. Like, and your body chooses where it goes, right? So if we can alleviate the environmental stress of this type of modern electromagnetic pollution, essentially, the body can like reorient and reorganize, which is really cool.
Yeah. So like I said, nature in your pocket, basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So a couple things going on there. I actually had to bolus a good amount of agmatine initially because when I first added it into EVO Pyramid, I was not used to the voltage gated calcium channel changes, and agmatine sulfate does a pretty good job of modulating that. So pulling down a little bit more hypersensitivity and kind of more acting like a stabilizing molecule than anything else. Because it's more that, what's that called? Midazoline receptors. So like there's 1, 2, and 3. That first receptor is more going to be the blood pressure changes. That's what you can actually take to stop the downregulation to opioids. The second receptor is more NMDA, glutamate, and then also kind of living in that world neurochemically with voltage gated calcium channels. And the third one's more insulin hepatic based. But I took like 3 grams of agmatine sulfate, which is a big dose. You normally take 250, 500 milligrams. But I was herxing neurologically pretty hard. I wasn't necessarily having the immune response, but I had a herx-ish response neurochemically. I had a headache for like 8 hours. So took a bunch of agmatine, normalized it, and then I was good. But I've had other coherent devices like this in the past, and nothing ever gave me that kind of response, which kind of shows me like the strength and the difference between Blue Shield and everything else out there, at least the majority, because other things will work on different, really different principles. We'll talk about those as well. But break down the difference in strength between like the portable versus like the pyramid, because you guys have a lot of different products of Blue Shield. How does someone, if they were just beginning, right? How do you slowly step it up? Do you base it off of square footage of the house? Do you base it off response from where they're living? I mean, obviously you have satellites in different places. Some people have smart homes, some people don't. But how do you usually recommend people do that?
Well, yeah, that's a interesting
It's a
comment.
lot.
I've
Yeah,
never
sorry.
heard of. I've never heard of that. I think our audience would love to know about that if that's something that can be beneficial for like navigating those first few days. But yeah, so what we do is there's a few things. So we try and get a relative understanding of where people are at. Living in New York and Seattle is completely different than living in like Iowa in the Midwest. They need different strengths. So we always recommend start first with a home unit if like you're on a budget, because that's going to be the strongest reference signal. It's going to be where you sleep, or you can take it to your office, and where you're spending the most time. You just basically want to create that entrainment because it's constantly sweeping the cells and reorienting and reorganizing everything endogenously. And the portables are far weaker, but they're made to basically, once you have that sympathetic resonance, so to speak, once you're entrained, once your body kind of like understands the signal environment, you can go in your car, you can take a flight and whatever, and then you can keep that on you, and it's enough to maintain that entrainment. And I've had mixed reviews because like the founder of the company would say, the portable's not enough to give you protection in this modern age. Like you need a home unit, like forgo the portable if you have to. But then I've had like, people, college students on a budget, they sleep with it under their pillow and they would rave about it. So, I mean, obviously that's subjective. How do you quantify that? It's just somebody's word. But I've heard that so many times that I think there is enough substance, even though we're dealing with like milliwatts of voltage, it steps up and down voltage in a particular way to create these field perturbations. And so ideally, you would basically go with what you can afford. Like you're going to future proof yourself. It's not like they're making less towers or cell repeaters. And with 5G coming out, it's more infrastructure intensive. So they put more repeaters, more places, because those millimeter waves don't like travel as far. So they have to be boosted, more periodically.
Is it like 260 antennas compared to the 4G, which was like a dozen, or what were the numbers on that?
I don't remember the exact numbers on that, but yeah, it's far more. They're going to probably try and start convincing people to put repeaters in their house, and people already use Wi-Fi boosters, to get like a signal further in their house. So they're kind of conditioned to that anyway. But the 5G repeaters are far different. So we use a tool, and we're actually getting ready right now. I've been working on this the last couple months, a new website, which integrates it. It'll pull FCC data, right? And basically people just put in their address and they just can see how many towers cell
Nice.
towers in their area. So right now you can use antennasearch.com. That's what we provide a link on our website. People go there and then you can really see in real time, like, whoa, there's a lot of radio antennas. There's a lot of cell towers, and we base the strength recommendation based on their area, basically. So somebody in rural can get away with like a Phi 2. Some people might need a Phi 3 or some of the more advanced, like the Evo, like you have, where it's like the best protection. And again, if you can afford it, you can future proof yourself from your area becoming more and more inundated with electromagnetic radiation.
I think I was always drawn to just the pyramid, just geometrically, right? So it's just that channeling of energy and how I can push things in a little bit stronger direction, we'll say. I've just always been more attracted to that. And then at our house, again, Lindsay designed it all, and she doesn't like, she understands some of this, but she doesn't quite care about it. But there's very little 90-degree angles at our house. Everything's more 6 to angulature curved. So we have a good amount of energetic flow, and we can really bounce things off and really converge it and just really spin it over on top of itself pretty well. And so when I was looking at it, we were talking, I was like, I got to go with the pyramid. Like I was just pulled to that for sure. And just from my experience with myself and all my clients and ones I've recommended it to, there's 9.5 times out of 10 people that notice a difference. I think part of the whole electronic or electromagnetic conversation is a little bit tough because some people aren't that sensitive. And back in the day, like I wasn't that sensitive. I was not sensitive at all. And then the more work you do with electromagnetism, the more you understand, or at least for me, if I understood things more, I knew what to look out for. And now it's to the point to where, like I told you, I've done certain podcasts in person, and it just feels like I'm like in a heavy blanket. Like I get headaches automatically, and I have the EVO portable, which it dampens it, but because I've turned it on and off on different podcasts, and I turn it right back on. Like I could feel the difference, especially going to the airports and all those things. But the application is pretty much universal because even if you don't feel it, it's still helping you and your animals and pretty much everything else. So, okay, cool. So we're based off of finances. We're looking off of overall geographic location and what we think is going to be there in the future potentially. Let's kind of steamroll that into the sign tamer because most people are going to be buying the sockets, right? The dirty electricity sockets. Talk more about what's happening on the transients with the sign tamers, and if someone has the money, because it's like under $2,000, right? It's not that expensive.
Right. Yeah. And just to comment on what you just said, that's interesting because my wife had the exact same experience with Blue Shield. It is weird that so many people feel effects from it. And that's really what got me into like, okay, we need to put this on the chopping block. Let's do a clinical trial, independent review board certified, like look at the voltage gated calcium channel gene expression and see the genomic changes, which it actually makes. But my wife actually was super not sensitive. And when we first introduced it, when I was experimenting with it, before I got like super inspired to be like, how can I help? How can I get this out to more people? Nobody in the West knows about this. You know, it was like in Australia and New Zealand for a long time, and like nobody knew about it over here. But, you know, after the first few nights, like I noticed everybody was more chill in the house. They didn't subjectively notice it, but I'm like, okay, because we had a teething child, we weren't getting sleep, and
Yeah.
I was noticing that I was getting the same amount of low sleep that I was getting, but then I was like feeling more energized and my brain was working better. I was like, wow, there's really something to this. And then now he's like, I don't feel anything. Fast forward several months to maybe a year later, like we went to a Whole Foods downtown and we parked. They had one of those garage style ones where you park, and there was this wall here. And then she's just like, ugh, like her hair stood up and she's like, what's that? Something feels off. And then we walked into the building and looked on the other side of the wall. There's like a bank of smart meters because there's apartments all above the Whole Foods. And I was like, wow, you have become more sensitive. That's crazy. But anyway, with dirty electricity. So this is like the trifecta that I've kind of put together. It's not so product centric anymore. Like Blue Shield was kind of like the best that I could find at the time as far as like what worked for electromagnetic radiation. But now I'm finding that it's a multiple modality approach. So with the sine wave coming to your house, you should have, in old times, you would have a natural just sine wave of 60 hertz, just pure. Problem is we have all of these like switching power supplies. We have microprocessing light, like LED lights. We have all these devices like computers and refrigerators, all this stuff that's basically stepping up voltage and creating what are known as electrical transients. So it's an irregular spike of voltage on that smooth sine wave. And that's problematic because it creates a field effect in the room that's biologically incoherent. It's problematic. And for a long time, you just see it everywhere online. I mean, Stetzer did a ton of work, and it's awesome evolving the understanding of it, but they were still kind of using the old technology. And I just didn't understand it because if I took an oscilloscope with a high pass filter, I was noticing, oh, this is not cleaning up all the high frequency noise on the line at all. It's basically, if you use an EMI meter, which is a small bandwidth, it's measuring certain aspects of that particular circuit. So you'd have to plug in these capacitance based filters all over your house. And I was just like, just used it, tested it, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to keep this in, because what was happening is like the way they work is they use a capacitor, which costs you more electricity, costs you more money to use, was basically shunting the excess voltage onto the neutral line, which was creating a whole magnetic field effect in the room that you didn't want. And most people, they have a couch against the wall, they have their bed against the wall, and these things radiate out. If you think about take away all the drywall and look at all the wiring in your house, you're like in an electromagnetic cage. It's like a radial antenna. So it's broadcasting these like transients, but also, if you're doing something about it from a capacitance based perspective, you're actually putting a lot of magnetic noise into the room based on how those work. So I actually came across Sine Tamer, which I think they have the most comprehensive suppression. So it's actually a true suppression device. That's way different than a dirty electricity filter, like a Stetzer style one. And this basically monitors all 360 degrees of the sine wave, but on all phases. So it's like line to line, line to neutral, line to ground. It's cleaning everything up basically as close to zero as you can get. So why this is important, why I started like putting it on the Blue Shield site and really recommending it, is because number one, I saw it work and I felt a difference. Like those are the two big things for me. Your proximity is everything. So we don't have to get into like near field and far field, like the difference between cell tower radiation versus like our local proximity. But when you're in the near field, your body couples with these electric fields in the area, and that either creates a coherent or beneficial effect if it's a therapeutic EMF, or an incoherent noise to signal ratio. So it puts more noise on your circuit, so to speak. So this one like takes everything down to zero on all lines, and it converts it to heat and grounds it onto the ground wire, which is how you actually get rid of this like transient noise. So that's the closest proximity. Of course, this computer right here or Wi-Fi router, that's aerial. So we use Blue Shield for like the aerial phenomena, stuff that's out of your control. If you're living in a neighborhood and you have like 6 Wi-Fi signals that you can see on your phone, it's kind of like acting as a dominant reference signal for all of that kind of electromagnetic noise, including, up to this point, the dirty electricity coming in your house. But I found it extra valuable to like, well, if we could take out this massive like antenna of wires in a house and we can actually clean that, and that's close proximity to you, that's even better. And then we go further. And then the third component of like EMF hygiene, if you will, is the electrotherapy, like inducing good electromagnetic charge into the cells and actually like stabilizing these electron membranes, these magnetic potentials within the body. And as I wanted to ask you more about what you were telling me about off air, as far as like, the hyperpolarization normalization and all that kind of stuff. That's super fast. I've never heard anybody else talk about that utilizing some of the therapeutic side. But suffice it to say, the Sine Tamer is just a simple device that you put into your breaker, and it does the whole house. And it basically, because the house is one big circuit, and it basically reduces the transients almost down to zero.
When we had ours installed, I didn't realize we needed 2, but got one, then had to get the other. And our electrician, so everyone who comes to our house, they're like, okay, these guys are a little bit weird. Like, we have all the stuff, all the cool gadgets, right? They had no idea what it was. I explained to them, I handed them the directions, and I made sure to say it mattered how close it was to the actual machine. Because do you want to talk about that really quick, actually? Because that was one thing I didn't realize until we talked about it. It's just the proximity to your actual wiring.
Oh, you're talking about the wire length as far as operating correctly. Yeah, you have to have a specific wire length, and that's well laid out in the diagram, the blueprint, the setup instructions. But yeah, you have to have a certain length, because it basically how the device works. It requires enough distance to be able to have a proper feedback loop, if you will. So if it's like neutralizing transients, it has to have like this the right geometry and length to the cables to operate correctly.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure I was out there, because I didn't realize how important that was until we talked about it and had it installed. And the first time they did it, it didn't look right to me. And I was like, let's do this a little bit different. Let's move it kind of up. There's one actually right behind here, and then there's one in our basement. And I've noticed, it's funny, it took me a little bit of time to feel the difference of the Sine Tamer, but that's only because we had everything else already installed in the house. We have multiple different therapies and modalities going on. We have the arc. Now I have the vortex. Like, we have all these things. It was a very minute change, and I noticed it about 2 weeks after putting it in, but it was still noticeable. But I kind of wish when we moved in, that was the first thing I did. Like, lived in the house for a week first, then had that installed to see the biggest difference. And I know if it would have done that, it would have been even more noticeable.
It's probably synonymous to what you do with like peptides and stuff. It's like you do too many things. What's working? It's
And that's why I try and do one thing at a time. And so I made sure I was taking all my notes. I try not to change more than one thing at a time. I'll do that for a week, 2 weeks, whatever. And I'll go back. Then I also correlate that with all my other clients that are doing it. So I have this nice little gathering of data where if I have 100 people using the sign tamer, what did we all look for? What did we all see? And what applied for 90% of people? And then what applied for everyone or no one? And then that's where it's been kind of nice because I can kind of fact check myself at check-in time. So every week my clients check in and we're talking about everything basically via email. And so I just put that in a little chart, whether it's peptide supplements, these devices, and then I can slowly fact check myself, go, oh, I saw that too, or I didn't see that, because I'm definitely more sensitive these days than most people. And I can tell them things to look out for, things not to look out for. And I try also not to create any expectations. So sometimes I will say, hey, don't look into it, don't research it, you know, roughly what it's going to do, but just see how you feel for a week or two. And
yeah.
even for
Conditioning.
I was going to say, even for the people that have spouses that aren't quite into it like me, like I had certain things in the house I didn't tell Lindsay about. And it was weeks later that she realized, hey, there was a difference when I walked into this room specifically. And then I would finally tell her, because you need that unbiased feedback, especially if someone doesn't quite get the mechanics behind it.
Yeah, and there's a conditioning the mind aspect, but also I've noticed over time a pattern emerge where people that exercise more, they take care of their body, they're more conscious about how they live a healthy lifestyle. They're usually less sensitive to electromagnetic energy unless they train the meditation, the consciousness aspect of it, because you can tune into this stuff, I think, from a healthy perspective. But I noticed a lot of people over the years that are like EMF sensitive or hypersensitive. They're kind of like the canary in the coal mine, but they've had like mold issues. They've had some kind of immune compromised state to where they're extra sensitive to this electromagnetic radiation, where normal people that are healthy, it's kind of like a bell curve. And some people that have just awesome genetics and like live a healthy lifestyle, they're not going to be as sensitive to it. They're not going to sit in front of a computer and get drained to the same degree as somebody who is more immunocompromised. So I thought that was an interesting pattern that I noticed over time.
And it kind of comes back to the mitochondria, which is what you mentioned with the hyperpolarization and the hypopolarization. So let's actually get into that, right? I know we're kind of bouncing around a little bit, but I think that's a good kind of next segue since you brought it up. So when I first bought the ARC, I had an amazing response. I told you about it right away. I probably messaged like 20 people because I was like, holy crap. Like I was looking for a good PEMF device that actually worked. And I think there's a lot of good ones on the market, but there's a degree, right? And it does seem that the less you spend for most of the products out there, the less effective they are. So you'll get some lymphatic changes, some hemodynamic changes with the mats that are a couple $100 or a couple thousand. But as you kind of work up, you don't have any kind of interaction with noble gases. You don't have the actual machinery that you have in your machine without it being, tens of thousands of dollars. And I have seen that scale linearly where sadly you do have to pay more, but the higher powered products work better. And so that was cool because yours was also more on the constructive base of physics, whereas like, if we look at what's it called, the biocharge is more like deconstructive, right? And I started noticing all of those changes immediately. So I thought, okay, cool. If this kind of makes sense from like a millivoltage aspect of mitochondria, we would see normalization of millivoltages. So everyone on the same page about negative 150 to negative 200 millivolts. That's where healthy mitochondria exist. I'd say most people are walking around these days, like if they're not in this space, they're probably negative 50 millivolts. Like they're not doing that good. And then as you get into like the longevity, biohacking fitness space, maybe you're pushing negative 100 or so. Then you get into the peptides and supplements or any electrotherapy. And now you see the negative 150 or negative 200 come up. Now, what's interesting is with electrotherapy, you can't hyperpolarize, so you can't go too high, right? You're not going to cause that overspin of mitochondria. But with the peptides and the supplements and the hormones, you definitely can. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. So I intentionally hyperpolarized. So I took way more mitochondrial peptides than I should have because I know what I need to take and what I can't. Took way too much. And when you hyperpolarize, you get a big spin off of ROS. So good amount of inflammation. You get brain fog, fatigue. Like it feels like you've never been this tired. It'll be like, it's always like 2 or 3 p.m. You do it in the morning about 2 or 3 p.m. Like you're just like, what's going on? Like you get so tired. There's no other feeling like that hyperpolarized spin. So I did that. I waited. I got all my work done earlier in the day because I knew that was going to happen. Went downstairs and did the ARC. And I believe it was only about a 10-minute session. And I was playing around with the actual intensities just based on biofeedback. But after those 10 minutes, the hyperpolarization was gone. And I brought that negative, whatever, say it was negative 250 millivolts, whatever arbitrary number, it was back in that 150 to 200 range. So it's interesting with the electrotherapy, you can rapidly stabilize mitochondrial membranes. So if you are basically looking at it with the millivoltages, so just the power of the actual mitochondria, you're also then modulating the mitofilin. So the mitofilin is on that inner membrane, also part of the cristae. Cristae is more the enzymatic portion that makes drug reaction occur in mitochondria, or any chemical reaction occur. It's fixing the mitofilin, fixing the cristae, so then you can actually either pump out or pump in what you need from like a subatomic particle aspect. And it was so cool. I thought, okay, cool. If that's happening mitochondrially, I could start structuring some water with this. I could start structuring peptides with this, just from a basic electrolysis side of things. So I got some different vials, got some different waters, and I've been playing around with it since I got it. I put it in the center of the actual device. You have the little handheld one, right? And I would play with the different. So water's interesting, especially when you're trying to use it to reconstitute peptides, because you're trying to improve that actual structure, order, and communication of the molecules.
Right.
And so if you want to say H3O2 structured, like whatever, all the same term to me. I know there's differences, but it just gets too complicated. And you can't you can't hit water with these electromagnetic fields too aggressively, or it almost fights back. And if you were to actually do a taste, exactly. Yeah. So if you do a taste test, because I did 1 glass of water and I did pretty low voltages wise for like 10 minutes, went out, tasted it, did a different glass of water, high voltages for 10 minutes. The 10 minutes of the high voltage, the higher power, tasted like trash. It tasted almost metallic-y. It tasted like I was like sucking on a rock. Whereas the other one tasted like slightly better than normal, and the viscosity was less. It was a little bit more watery. And then you play with it and you kind of dial in where you need it to be. Then I did the same thing with peptides. Only I would get bacteriostatic water vials, do that, structure it, order it, and then I'd have that in the fridge to sit, because that structure order is not going anywhere. Then every time you'd introduce to your peptides, now there's better peptide to peptide bond, better communication. And then technically, I did destroy some peptides doing this, playing around with the same ARC device, the same electrotherapy, because again, if you go too high, you just break the bonds. And so I did it with, I always use melanotan too, because I can't take more than 100 micrograms or I get sick to my stomach. And so I know if I take more than that, I have problems. So tested it first, no problems. Did a little bit lower. I think that was, again, it seems to be about 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off, let it rest. And just like you would anything else, slow adaptations. And so with the MT2 after that, the 100 micrograms, which never makes me sick, made me sick. So I thought, okay, cool. I'll switch. I did a different MT2. I did this at a higher voltage, again, about 10 minutes or so off, 10 minutes on or so. And I felt nothing. So I did, okay, 300 micrograms, nothing. 500 micrograms, nothing. So, okay, I destroyed that molecule. Right. So it's that was going back to what you got.
Just to clarify, you're doing this on the peptide itself, not yourself prior to.
Correct. Yeah, these were on the actual vials themselves of the peptides. I did with the backwater, did with actual just water in a glass. Then I did it on my body. So different ways where we're looking at like electromagnetic therapy to change not just the cells of your body, your mitochondria, but your peptides, your water, kind of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And man, there's a lot of points that I thought of as you were talking, and my mind seems to always be 10 steps ahead of me. So
yeah, sorry, I apologize.
No, that's great. I love this conversation. Like I never really get this deep on shows or podcasts. So this is a lot of fun for me. So yeah, it's when you talked about like constructive versus destructive. On the arc, centrifugal magnetic divergence is inherently, it's coherent, meaning it's using a point source or a plasma base to create the magnetic charge, similar to what you'd see in lightning. Lightning strikes, it's this capacitance built up and then it like fires off and you have this like magnetic flux that comes from it. But it's using this kind of principle of almost like chaos therapy. So that's why we actually made the pulses like randomized. They're not just like like stable, like, because nothing is consistent. This is kind of what we learned from the Blue Shield side, and we applied it to magnetic therapy. So yeah, it's interesting because it can have a structuring effect and then it can have a destructuring effect. But when we're looking at the polar lipids and like getting there's always a net deficiency of electrons on one side or the other. And when you induce a strong magnetic flux, it's going to basically vibrate that. So it's going to basically let your body ring out at its own natural harmonics. So the organization factor comes from throwing the body out of organization or order, if that makes sense. So it's creating a chaotic like flux effect throughout all the tissues and densities of the body, and the body reorienting itself is like the healing and membrane stabilizing potential. So if you throw yourself out of whack, that totally makes sense to what you're saying. You take the mitochondrial peptides, you hyperpolarize. What's going to bring you back? Well, you shake things up, right? You're doing a strong magnetic flux and it's allowing the body to reorient, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And let me clarify what I'm talking about, because I make up my own words, my own terms, because I can't find certain people, books, or whatever to really explain it, at least how I see things. When I personally talk about constructive versus that deconstructive physics in this world, I would compare the deconstructive more to like the Rife machine or more like the biocharger, where I'd use that to kill off parasites, to kill tumors, to do more deconstructive base work, more like explosive, more versus more like implosion. So more of actual killing versus real healing. Whereas in the healing side of things, like you said, and I should have pointed that out with that constructive based physics approach, is you have to have a stress to cause an adaptation to cause the healing in the first place. So technically shaking up chaos, still destruction, but the ultimate end of healing, not killing, if that makes sense.
Right. And then you're talking about modulation versus impulse. So there's different types of PEMF, and, this is more on the impulse wave. So it's like, think of it as a massive transient spike versus like an oscillation. So a lot of these like lower, like $2,000 devices, or it has a mat and a computer brain. It's basically using a carrier signal of various like Beamer is a sine wave, and these other ones have a triple sawtooth wave. There's different, carriers, but they modulate it based on frequency. And there's problems with that because there's edge noise. The body doesn't, like I said, it doesn't see that perfect 10 hertz endogenously as 10 hertz. The edge noise has an interference, and there's a natural impedance to the body. So when you're talking about like these coil type devices, that's a completely, yes, destructive wave interference. I'm more of a fan of if you're going to use destructive wave interference, which I've personally moved away from more over the years once I started learning about constructive wave interference and how much more beneficial that is, because you're letting the body do the work. Destructive wave interference, when you're using a radio carrier signal that goes through plasma, because plasma basically acts like a directional antenna, and you're modulating a signal from radio frequency. I find that a lot more efficacious than using something like a biocharger, a Tesla light system, Vibe machine. Any of those older kind of, like, what they have is like a vertical coil and electrostatic charge. If you look at the Russian research, and the Russians have been way in the electrotherapy space. I mean, they were studying peptides long before anybody else. They're studying electromagnetic therapy, psychic phenomenon, all kinds of cool stuff. They talked about this strange radiation that's thrown off when you use an air core transformer, when you're creating a high electrostatic potential, and it's usually around metal. And when it interfaces with the metal, it spins off these, like, what they call strange electricity. And I think those are problematic long term. Like, I mean, maybe short term. And again, I go back to my principles of like from herbalism, which is basically like there's the only difference between a medicine and a poison is a dose, but also structure and modulation can affect the body. So with the Therify, it's called what Tesla called a floating system. And I'm just pointing out Therify just as a distinction point, because I didn't really know about the strange radiation thing until my friend Paul Harris, he's the inventor of Therify. He really he's just so much more advanced in his understanding. I'm just going to give people the Reader's Digest version. But basically, like, when you have these fields interact with the metal and interact with the body, it's going to be create a lot more noise. A lot of those use the multi-wave oscillator circuit, like the George Lakhovsky thing, which Tesla's like, here, run with this, play with it. And what that does is it uses a plate and it spins the plate and basically interrupts the charge, and it creates this multi-wave oscillation, which is like jarring. It's like a jackhammer at the cellular level. And what Tesla was really into, he's like, the floating system. We don't want any reference to ground. So when you're on a Therify, you have this electrostatic charge and this biphasic system, which is separating spin charge, and you're creating that perfect 0-point modulation. Basically, the modulation is only there to create that charge collapse and that dielectric acceleration. And it's very constructive. It's like cold electricity, but the strange radiation acts like a hot electricity. It's like getting that plasma arc off the Tesla coil and hitting your cells. They permanently damage your cells, and you're creating a field effect that's very similar. So you don't actually want that. So I always recommend, if people are using destructive wave interference, go for like a resonant light. Go for like a Rife machine that's well designed, that has the proper carrier signal and proper modulation, where you're getting clean signals and you're not getting this noisy, incoherent multi-wave oscillating effect.
Let's look deeper, like we did with the Blue Shield. Let's look deeper into the arc. In terms of what you have in there, plasma generator wise, noble gas wise, like if someone were to open it up and know what they're looking at, what would they actually see?
It's basically, I would consider it more of an old school technology. I think we just fixed a lot of the problems with it. So it's a plasma based technology. So it's using a plasma spark to create an impulse wave. And it's super powerful. I haven't really felt a machine that's as powerful. And a lot of the impulse wave machines are moving more towards semiconductor technology. I'm not a fan. I like keeping it old school. I like keeping it, analog, and that's where really you get into price. So we're machining these parts. We're machining the capacitors a specific way to where they're like randomizing the flux. So it's creating a randomized. You've used it on like kind of lighter settings where it's not like creating strong muscle contractions, but you can almost hear that it's like fluttering. That really has a depth of field penetration benefit to it, because I'm interested in how do we get down to the bone marrow? How do we get that stem cell activation? How do we like affect the bones and the deeper tissues where a lot of magnetic fields, people don't realize that it just kind of bounces off the body. So I played with so many machines over time, and the thing about the internal components is that they're all custom machined, but we overbuilt everything. Because if you look at like MagnaWave or like Hugo or any like things that I played with in the past, that I wasn't quite thrilled with the idea that every 100 or 200 hours you have to ship a 40-pound machine to a different state or a different country to have it recalibrated. It's like, why don't you just build the spark chamber to let it be just bomb proof? So that's what we did. And we also wanted the most control possible. So we created a modular spark gap. So it's basically mechanical dials that like dilate the spark chamber. And that basically allows you to have like control the pulse rate and the intensity. Of course, they're interconnected. You can't really separate it, but it gives you the most control over an analog machine as possible. So it has this intuitive feel that I really like, where a lot of people just set it and forget it. They put it on a setting they like and they go on that every day. But a lot of people like, well, what if I play with higher pulse rate today, where more brain and neurological activation, or I want that deep tissue penetration? So they put it on the really deep, slow pulsing where there's a lot of capacitance or a lot of charge mobilization. So yeah, it's nothing like super like cutting edge, because everybody's kind of moving more towards like digital. And if you understand digital, as smooth as you can smooth out a sine wave, you basically have the stair step effect. So there's always this gating that happens. Think of it like plugging in a guitar. You play an acoustic guitar, it's the natural resonance. It's like, it has a certain feel to it. It's like an analog stereo. It's like analog tube amps just feel warmer. They just have it. Anybody who's an audiophile, they know the difference between that and a solid state amplifier. It's just a different feel and effect. And, a lot of the stuff that I've played with as far as like the high intensity semiconductor type technology, it feels really spiky, but this feels like you have more bandwidth. Like think of a diaphragm, you have the low end frequencies, the high end frequencies, but you also have that nice mid range. So it's like, it really kind of moves and compresses, and for lymph flow and, helping the fascia to unwind and all these kind of stuff. Not only just, mitochondrial membrane gradients, but just, the physicality of it. It's almost like getting some body work in a sense. And you probably felt that on the higher settings.
It does. And I figured out for myself, I know it changes from person to person, but I can hold a charge from that for about 8 to 10 hours, depending on the day, what I'm doing. It lasts me. I'll do it in the morning. It lasts me until the afternoon. And then I used to another session. Then now that I have the Vortex, I do a little bit of a session there for different reasons, which we'll talk about later on for that. But that charging effect has been super noticeable. And it was really cool to play around with that, and then grounding, and then seeing how fast you can actually drop that charge just by stepping outside. Versus now, depending on the time of day and everything, I might ground beforehand, get the static off, and then do that, kind of have that clean slate type of approach. But doing it post-workout for me it's been a massive change in my own recovery, in my own ability to perform throughout the day neurochemically, and just in every single way. I'm all about, I don't want to have any second of my life where I'm not happy, energetic, and just ready to go. I want to be able to talk for like 100 hours straight and not stop. And that's honestly been it. I don't like saying things are game changers. I'm not just saying this because you're on here. The ARC has been one of the few, I mean, seriously, it's been one of the few game changers for me to where I'm like, yeah, if you can afford it, buy it. It was one of the best investments I ever made. Lindsay wasn't too happy because I didn't tell her when I was going to buy it. And then it came in, and then eventually she was like, oh, how much it cost? I'm like, 25 grand.
Yeah,
but then she used it and she loved it. And I had the kids on it every now and then, and the kids respond super well to it. But it's so funny. Like, they hold a charge for seemingly like 36 hours. No one's sleeping that night. They're just going because the amount of coherence they have is so high. They're so fresh and healthy. And there hasn't been 30 years. Like, I'm 33 years old. So there's 33 years of damage that I'm still trying to work through. They just hold that charge forever. So I got to pick it on the right days, because if we're not outside playing for 12 hours, like, they're going to be up for like 2 days straight.
Yeah. And kids love it. I mean, my youngest, it's amazing how intense, like the intensity they can handle. And that's one thing about magnetic fields, is it highlights, it's not like a pain sensation, but people have inflammation and it highlights the inflammation. So you can actually it's almost like a diagnostic tool. It's like, oh, my hip or my shoulder or whatever, I'm feeling a little more like electrical type feeling, even though it's like a magnetic field. Of course, we're electrical endogenously. And it's just, it'll highlight it. But these kids, I could pump it up to almost full blast, and they're like, "Yeah, this is awesome!" And it's just like shaking them, almost bouncing them off the bed. It's totally wild to see.
It's cool. So you'll be happy to know that Jameis has been enjoying his. So we got Jameis Winston on the New York Giants and Arc Machine, and I didn't realize this until I showed up to do some consulting with him a couple weeks ago. But he gets out from his car. I'm waiting at his place, and he's lugging it around. And so he takes it to the facility, I think, every single day,
Oh
brings
wow.
it back every single day. I'm like, that it's not like the most mobile device to like move around. You can, but like I wouldn't bring that every day. But he does it. Other players use it. I talked to them about it, and they're seeing some really cool things over there. So, and I bring that up because I genuinely want it to be in more people's hands. I want you to succeed because you deserve it. It's a great product, and I see that really coming, really becoming mainstream in the NFL starting, and then it'll slowly bleed over into the NFL or NBA rather. And the NHL is a little bit slightly behind, respectfully. A lot of those therapies, like HBOT, is still kind of like the big thing, and they're not quite there yet. But I'm trying to get that in with some teams in Florida as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like initially I didn't build it for, scalability. I built it because like, how do I build the best machine that I want for me and my family? And then it just kind of like, we sold it to a couple chiropractors here, some people on the West Coast that were friends of ours. And they're like, wow, we're getting really great results. So I'm trying to get more practitioners aware of it. So at least people can go get sessions somewhere because, the distinction is, I mean, it's just different feeling than any PMF I've ever played with. It's not trying to say it's better or worse or anything like that. It's just like the structure is very, very different. When you can get that randomization, your body doesn't really build a tolerance to it. That's really, I think, the cool thing about it. These ones that just pulse like constantly, it's like the body's like, okay, I understand that. Like I'm adapted to it. The body's always changing. So we don't really want to have something that's not changing, but it does need to be point source. It can't really be semiconductor magnetic fields because those don't interface with the body in the same way as far as the cellular structure is concerned.
And we can't post a picture or anything, but you sent me a picture of the actual wave itself, which you don't see anywhere. Like I've never seen another device producing that kind. So I don't want to get onto that, but it really is unique. It's different. It's special. And I think real quick, who would not be a candidate for this? Because there's obviously certain people that might want to be a little cautious.
Just people with electrical implants. If you have like, we say heart stents, even though some people have used their own discretion and played with it and low intensities and have been just fine. But usually people with like a pacemaker, internal insulin pumps, anything electronic, it will fry it. Don't take your key fob on it. I've had a friend actually destroy their key fob. Unfortunately, it'll just zap it. So yeah, you just basically don't want any metal, no like bio tracker rings or anything like that. But most people get some kind of benefit, and that's why I focused on this first. Like I'm really into the plasma technology. I'm into a lot of this kind of these different modalities because it's like toys for me. It's like I like experimenting what's working. Like I think electrotherapy, we haven't really harnessed its full potential as far as like longevity, health, and wellness, and what it could do long term. And I think it's kind of the future in a lot of respects if we can kind of like create an ultimate system that's modulated by the heart and the nervous system, so your body's telling the machine what to do essentially. But yeah, there's not a lot of people that don't even benefit because magnetism is the fundamental force in reality. When everything coalesces into electromagnetic energy, like magnetism is the driving, that's charge mobilization. That's actually creates the charge of life. So I think it's a super important modality. It's like a base level, and we can layer things on top. When we're looking at like photobiomodulation, you're just using narrow bandwidths of light. It's not very full spectrum, but magnetism, because it affects everything in the body, and it touches so many things upstream. To me, it's like the Clotho of electrotherapy instruments because everything downstream is beneficially affected by it. And it's like more of a regulatory thing and not so much like driving the body in one direction. And that's exactly what you stated when you said, like, I hyperpolarized and then I normalized. It's normalizing, which is really great.
It is cool. And so I think that's a good transition then to get more into the Therify. I don't have that device yet. Looked into it, researched it, think I know roughly what's going on there. But let's talk more about that now, and then how you're pairing that with something like the Arc, the differences, because even though they're completely different, I don't think people quite know the differences there. So let's dig into that a little more.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap there. And again, if we kind of use that electromagnetic dielectric like modality or field theory, essentially, they're both using potential energy. So that dielectric inertial plane, one is creating centrifugal magnetic divergence, the toroid, curvilinear lines of force that are affecting the body and creating that flux within the electron transport chain and the mitochondrial membranes. The Therapy is like basically the inverse, which is super cool. Like if anybody wants to kind of go online and go to vitality.com, that's the home of the original Therapy technology. They can look at the machine, and what it looks like is two plasma tubes on each side of a bed with a big, huge Tesla coil underneath, and then an amplifier that's the driver. So, okay, where do we start on this? So basically what we're doing is with PEMF, we're creating charge, capacitance, and then that capacitance disperses and creates this magnetic flux, and the body acts like, again, a nonlinear capacitor and absorbs that charge, but it also adapts to being thrown off balance. This is more of a coherence device. This actually takes everything down to zero. It gets rid of all electromagnetic field influence and allows the body to endogenously couple to its own, it lets it reset. Basically, it lets your body do what it naturally does, but it seems to have higher mind and emotion aspects of it, that it's like I think of it as a consciousness amplifier. We don't like talk a lot about that publicly, but the more I've used it, the more I'm like, if you're into like Qigong or using your mind to heal or do any other far out stuff, it seems like it amplifies that effect. And speaking of the hyperboloid, if you take these tubes, separate them out, flip them around, kind of looks like the tubes of a Therapy. And so you're creating this counter rotational charge, you're creating charge collapse, and your body is acting like a dielectric medium and absorbing that coherent light as a sponge. And here's another thing. This is why I think it's probably the coolest electrotherapy instrument on the planet. It's because it's the only one that demonstrates the time reverse wave effect in real time. And what this means is that you're basically creating these longitudinal compressions and refractions that you can see in a gas tube. So you take a 4-foot gas light bulb from like just Home Depot or Lowe's, you put it on the table, and basically what you'll see if you're not touching it, because you will act like a ground potential, so it'll kind of start creating these compressions and refractions in the gas that you can see, and it'll start from your finger. But if you leave it alone, it'll start at the very center and move backwards. So the field will, the compressions and refractions will move in the opposite direction. So you have these basically these plasma fields that are counter rotationally vortexing and creating charge collapse. And in the center point, that null spot, it creates the compression and refractions back in the opposite direction of which it came, which is definitionally a time reverse wave effect. So if you think about order, coherence, and reversing cell memory back to its state of highest order or coherence, that's the only device I've actually seen that has some kind of demonstrable, like real time, like anybody, an untrained mind, somebody who doesn't know the physics, they can actually see that in real time, which is, we call it the party trick. That's like where you demonstrate like the Therapy actually doing something with a field effect, and the gas is the demonstration or the medium by which that field effect is expressed.
So a couple questions. So do we think there's going to be like a neonatal gene interaction, and then there's like a neuromelanin pineal? Because if you're saying there's more like a consciousness aspect, I'd assume that'd be neuromelanin pineal modulated. And then if there's that reversal of cell memory, that almost has to be neonatal gene based, at least to some degree. I know this is probably very out there theoretical, right? I'm sure nothing is really tethered completely, but like from what you've seen experience since I've never used it before, when I hear that explanation, I think, oh, these systems have to be interacting with those mechanisms. Does it seem like there's those interactions, or what are you seeing?
We don't even understand like what interactions are not happening. So if we're basically making the body a lot more coherent, so a magnetic field is going to flux and the body's going to reorient. This is basically going to structure the plasmoids that are in and around the body and actually create coherence so the body communicate. It's about cell-to-cell communication. And if you look at cancer cells, for example, electrically, both as far as millivolt potential, but also like immune communication, they're kind of walled off to the immune system. The immune system can't really find it. So if you're increasing exponentially the communication at the cell-to-cell level, that will touch pineal, that will touch immune function, that'll touch cardiovascular. There's nothing that it really won't. But we see a big shift in not heart rate variability, but there was what was his name? Glenn, was it Glenn Ryan? I think Dr. Glenn Ryan. I can't remember his name. I'm spacing it. But basically, he did basically showed a 30% increase in ATP just with short sessions on Therapy. That's kind of our bottleneck right now. It's like has like 11, 12 years of like anecdotal data, but we really need to find somebody that can actually put it to the test, because so many people go parasympathetic. And I've seen this in real world. Like we've gone to a couple of biohacker conferences, and it's a very quiet machine with like something like a biocharger. It's like on, you're like, whoa, they're doing something like subjectively, like you don't know if it's coherent or incoherent or whatever, but you know it's on and it's doing something. Therify is super peaceful. It's very quiet, but you can actually feel the vibration and the charge. And it's weird because the electrostatic charge, as it builds up, the first couple minutes, not so much, but after like 3, 5, 6 minutes, you start noticing it. And in places where people are on buttered coffee and who knows what kind of stimulants and fluorescent lights and like people pollution, all the rest of it, you think a 3 to 6 minute session, like nobody's going to really feel anything. It's the most powerful subtle energy device in the world. We say jokingly, but it's basically like everybody goes parasympathetic. It's almost like they get a power nap on it in the probably the least ideal situations you can be in. So when people bring it into their home or their practice, it's just, we have, and because the biology prioritizes what it does with the surplus energy and surplus coherence, it's all over the map as far as like benefits, because we can't, that's been the trouble, is like people say, well, I've got this problem, I want the solution. Well, really what you're doing is you're creating a high power coherent EMF that's structuring everything in your body, because you're going to that dielectric potential. See, when you have a air core transformer like that Tesla coil that he designed, which is biphasic, you're basically, most of the magnetism stays towards the center and the electrostatic charge goes out. The inverse is the PEMF. So the electricity stays more towards the transformer and the magnetic flux moves out. So again, it's an inverse relationship. So if somebody was to use both these technologies, for example, you would start with the PEMF, shake things up. I think the very crude analogy is like, it's like body work. You get the chiropractic, you get the massage, all this kind of stuff. You get that lymphatic flow, and you're getting electrical side stuff too. But then you get on the Therify afterwards, and it's like acupuncture. It's like very detailed. The body can go very, very specific because you're taking all interference from every oscillatory angle away. And you're only left with your body's natural endogenous oscillatory regulation.
Okay, so it would be like the magnetoporation opening, dumping, and then kind of sealing it back off cell-wise, right?
Yeah, and strengthening. And it's like, it's working on the I don't want to say hardware because that's too simplex. Like,
Yeah.
So basically you're mixing things up, you're getting detoxification, but then you're I would say strengthening is probably the best way to do it, and making everything communicate much more efficiently, on orders of magnitude more efficiently.
So with the technology we have today, if you guys are talking about doing whatever, a study or it's so hard, because if it's fixing everything, where do you start? Right? Like, where have you guys thought about starting with that? Because everyone loves their research and data, and something like this honestly deserves it. It's that cool from what you say. I've heard a lot of people, I talk with some people who have used it, and they say the same things. They have great experiences with the ARC, great experiences with the Therify. But where would you, as like a business owner and part, because it's part of Paul Harris owns 50%, right? It's like both you guys?
I'm not actually a business partner with him. I just kind of help, we manage the website, and we vertically integrated it into our other businesses, because anything I'm a fan of, I like want to help with. So I'm just trying to get him out of the weeds, because he's got other inventions. I'm just trying to get him out there, like stuff I can't talk about, but I really want to. But yeah, I just need to get him back to the bench, and he's been so in the weeds, like building this stuff and like dealing with like customer service. So we've kind of offloaded a lot of that onto our team. And I've just been a fan. Like, before I even got involved from a business perspective, I've had my Therify since I think 2018 or 19, and I'm just a super fan. Like, I'm just trying to figure out like what's the latest, greatest, best thing, and like what's the most Swiss Army knife too, because like I don't necessarily want 100 different gadgets. Like, what are the things that I can simplify to do the most? And that's where like magnetism, obviously, and then the inverse of that, which is the plasma technology. I think that's a perfect yin and yang pairing. So I was super stoked to get involved, but I'm not an owner in Therify at all. We just kind of handle like the worldwide distribution and education aspects of it.
Okay, then. So with you and Paul in your conversations, if you're talking about research and like actually like putting tests out there, what are you guys thinking about in terms of like, how would you test this? Like, would you go with looking at like some of the mitochondrial tests? Would you be going with like traditional labs, just see HSCRP drop in like an hour difference, or like what are you thinking?
Yeah, absolutely along those lines. So mitochondrial ATP production, we've already tested that to a degree, and that's shown promise. I'm also thinking about stuff that we tested in the Blue Shield, because it's the nervous system is so electrically sensitive. I mean, it's 8% of the body weight, but it uses 20% of the body's voltage. Like, the brain and the nervous system is super important. So like the voltage gated calcium channels, I'd be interested in looking at that. Heart rate variability, like long term, I'm a fan of it, but like the short term, it's just so easy to influence heart rate variability. Just like it's easy to influence like electroencephalograph. So if you have like brain scans, like a lot of people, like for instance, there's companies that use that for like a test that prove that their EMF product is doing something. But to me, like I can take somebody through a guided meditation. I can tell them to lie down, close their eyes, and I can program a Z plot on saying this is green, this is good, this is red, and program it. And any electrical stimulation can be, like, does that prove that I'm changing the field effect in the room because, of brainwave states? Usually not. So I was like, how do we look at the genomic changes, like the voltage gated calcium gene expression through True Diagnostic? That was cool. You can't really influence that whatsoever. And then Blue Shield had those amazing results with it. So I'd be super interested to see voltage gated calcium channel expression, and more of the mitochondrial and inflammation markers for sure.
I'd like to see like some cytometry done with like stem cells too. Because if you're getting that bone effect, you're going to be dumping out a ton into circulation. It'd be cool to see not just how much is released, but how long it stays circulating the system. Because if we see someone like these over-the-counter supplements, that they do a great job of releasing endogenous stem cell production, you'll get some for like 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, but it kind of tops off around 6, depending on like if you use a Phanosonion, Flossequia, what algae, like all these different things, right? But I feel like it just makes more intuitive sense that something like an ARC and Therify, or even just Therify alone, that there'd be a more prolonged response release, because you're changing, like you said, kind of like the hardware, you're changing everything in there. So you'd think you get more donation, chemically speaking.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, that would be really cool to look at. And we'll get there. It's one of those things where it's not, Therify was super popular for a number of years, but then a lot of machines have come out on the market, and some of them I think have a better fit and finish, to be honest. Like the external appearance looks impressive, like these super beds or whatever. But a lot of
beds look cool.
They look super cool, but like form follows function. And like, I think Therify looks pretty cool as far as an old analog, all handmade. I mean, those just blowing the glass tubes in noble glasses under vacuum in a kiln, like that takes a certain amount of skill to get the proper, geometry, like the water molecule geometry, like the 108 degrees, give or take. Just doing that alone, let alone the handmade circuits and the amplifier and the driver and the hand wound Tesla coils. It's like an artesian product on a lot of levels. But, one thing people don't get is that the substance is there, meaning like the way Paul takes the layerment and combines all these modalities into one system that has that net effect. It's unseen anywhere. And a lot of the super bed, but I almost did a video called The Myth of the Super Bed. A lot of these beds, there's like, well, let's just put PMF with photobiomodulation and like TENS units and oxygen, hydrogen, all this kind of stuff. And what they don't understand is that like we're very phase sensitive. Our bodies, like you can't tell the body to go take a nap and then jog at the same time. Like you're getting this, like when you introduce charge and charge mobilization with PEMF, and then you're trying to do red light therapy on top of that, it's like trying to do detailed painting on a canvas that's moving. It's just like, it really doesn't make sense. So a lot of these things interfere when it comes to that super bed modality where you're trying to do everything in the kitchen sink. So it has to be done in a very specific way and modulated in a specific way that it stays coherent versus just being like the body going like, holy shit, I just need to like check out. I need to block this stuff. And that's really where we're seeing the delineation of like very effective, coherent electrotherapy devices and stuff that it'll create electrostatic charge, it'll create voltage, but it doesn't mean it's doing beneficial things. And a lot of times, a lot of these machines do harm long-term, unfortunately. And, I just got to say it how it is, as far as I understand it. Not talking about on any particular product, but you got to really know what you're talking about when you're talking about high voltage systems and what you're actually doing to your physiology.
So do you think it's actually a style problem or an education problem? Because from like my perspective, understanding the products you guys have and looking at it, and comparing it even to some of the other super beds, but some of the beds look super cool, super sharp. I do appreciate more of the detail and the things like the Therify. But I honestly don't think it's a style problem. I think a lot of people don't quite understand it. And I think, and I don't know what you do on, I mean, we've talked off air about like the marketing and like the education, things like that. But at least from my perspective, I think it's more on the education aspect where people just kind of don't know what it does.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And like what I would love to have something like ARC be integrated in a Therify. You do it all at once and save time, but they just don't play well together. You just can't really put it like, because you have a magnetic field, you have a machine, like you really shouldn't have a ton of metal in the Therify field because metal acts as a ground potential. And again, going back to like Tesla's idea of a floating system, you don't want any reference to ground. It's like you're floating in this plasma cocoon and your body is acting like the ground potential, which is where you want it. So you can't really have some of these modalities. You can't have like a red light bed over a Therify with, your PMF mat coil, because everything would just like create interference. And, as far as like all arounders, like the Therapies just kind of like got everything going on because it uses PEMF as the progenitor. It's like what creates the initial movement, but then you get the electrostatic charge, you get the longitudinal waves, you get the scalar potential, and you get the time reverse waves all in one thing. It's just hasn't been done. But, again, magnetism's cool as far as a start because you get this potent, like, again, I like the analogy. I'm not saying it increases Clotho or anything. I'm not saying it is Clotho, but I'm just saying using that analogy because it works so far upstream that all these other benefits, like you could use one or the other and get like tremendous benefits. And there's this cross pollination of benefits. But when you use them stacked side by side, where you start with like the chaos and the disruption and the movement, and then you get to like the peaceful kind of like, how do we get back to zero? How do we recalibrate endogenously? It's just a perfect pairing, in my opinion.
What's the safety on the Therify in terms of touching? Because I can imagine, because how much power did you say is coming out? 500,000?
500,000 volts. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, what does that look like?
Potential. It's not like shooting lightning bolts out of it or anything, but
basically,
I don't recommend this, but I have touched the bulbs themselves and it's fairly safe. The wires. So the whole thing is like a circuit. So think about it like this. You have the amplifier, the dryer. It's basically running power and modulation into the Tesla coil. The Tesla coil is splitting charge and creating these counter rotational vortexes. Those wires are hot. And I've tried, I think down the track, we're going to design something that's a little bit like safer because you don't want to touch those. It's not like I've had my cat touch it and she won't touch it again. You'll get like kind of a nasty shock. It won't kill you or anything, but it's just unpleasant. So you don't want to touch the live wires.
She's just a little mentally handicapped now. She can't, purr anymore.
Yeah. So those live wires, that resonance, again, it's creating a cocoon around your body. So every part of the system, the Tesla coil creates a torsion field. There's counter rotation torsional field. So there's this trifecta of torsion fields, and the wires themselves are resonant. We can't use certain wires with it because if we were trying to insulate it, it would detract from the effect. So we could create like maybe like plastic housings or something down the track, but it's super safe in a lot of respects. Again, it's the same principle. Anybody with any pacemakers or any electronic implants is a no-go, unfortunately. Paul's mom has heart stents and she uses it all the time with no problem. So like heart stents don't seem to be an issue. People tend to get hung up on, the minutia. Like I have braces or I'm wearing jeans and I have a button. It's like, yeah, it's more about density metal. You just don't want to like a safe on the other side of the wall or a refrigerator, something that's high density. It's going to suck that charge out. Or if you're on a basement floor, you don't want the Tesla coil just sitting on the floor because it'll zap the charge into the ground and ground it. So you want to create it floating. And that's why we created the Therify bed where it's like metal free, organic latex, and it's like the Swiss slat system. So any way you lay on that bed, your spine is staying straight, which I think helps with conductivity and just like coherence internally.
And you said that's only a 3 or 6 minute session?
Minimum. Yeah. I mean, I do usually 20, 30 minutes. I take power naps on it. I've gone up to an hour. If you live in a really hot climate, you don't want the tubes to overheat the electrodes essentially, but practitioners usually use anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour for a full session that you can go really deep. But we see changes in the ATP, like in Glenn Ryan's research and at the 6 to 9 minute range.
Because I'm just thinking ahead to questions we'll probably get, and one of them would be, "Hey, can I sleep with the Arc? Can I sleep with the Therify?" Yeah, just want to make sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's so powerful. You need a break. The idea is to just get your body into a charged and coherent state to where your body just does the rest of the work. You'll sleep better for sure if you do it before bed, but sleeping on it, you wouldn't get good rest. I mean, just think of that stimulant. Imagine yourself being on the Arc.
No,
I mean, just no freaking way. Yeah. Yeah, people don't understand how powerful it actually is. And even with Therify, like I've taken naps on it, but if you were to do that all night, I just don't know if that would be actually beneficial. And I asked Paul about this too, because I was like, well, is there any like diminishing returns? Like if you stay on this thing like super long, can it be harmful? Is there just like no benefit? And he's like, because it's so coherent, like the longer you're in the field, it's just good because the body bioregulates. It just knows how to balance itself. And I can attest to this just simply the fact where we go to these conferences and we're on our feet 8 to 10 hours a day. And I'm in the field. I mean, just because you're not in the null zone where that sweet center spot, like we've had people, and it's funny because when I have friends and family over, it's like the party always goes down to the Therify room because everybody's just like, "Hey, can I get a session?" Sure. And everybody's down there and everybody's feeling the effect. And I've become so sensitized to it that I can be in the other room and feel it because I think the field effect, I mean, that's a lot of voltage potential. And I don't know if it's psychosomatic at this point where it's like, I know it's on, so I feel the effects that I feel when I sit on it, or if I'm actually feeling it. However, it's a huge field.
So comparison on the fields between the arc and the Therify, because I know for the arc, there's a pretty noticeable field for about what would that be? Almost like 6 feet outward all around and almost 10 feet upwards, roughly.
Yeah.
What does it look like? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, think about a torsion field. So it's basically expanding out. I've had a tri-field, just basic, and tri-field meters are super limited, and we can talk about like measuring EMFs and all this kind of stuff if you want. But basically, I've measured it up to the ceiling, and maybe that was 8-10 foot ceiling.
Okay, that sounds about right.
And
Yeah.
even when you're not having it on the strongest setting too, so you can have it on the high pulse rate where it's like and just like running, where you don't get a lot of like muscle contraction, but the field effect is massive on that thing.
Yeah, every time I use it, if the dogs are downstairs, they come over, they sit right by me, they kind of like push me to get like closer. So I'm like, get out of here, you know? But they love it. The dogs love it. That field sounds right. So with the Therify, even bigger field effect,
But yeah,
larger, rounder.
Paul has told me 50 feet, and he's had some
Oh,
interesting
wow.
testing in his lab. We haven't done enough to really like publicly say anything, but I was just blown away because like I've been into EMF research a long time. Like, how do we actually affect this? So in his warehouse, he has some hot spots. Of course, you can take like he has more sophisticated equipment, spectrum analyzers and microwave, measuring devices. And with his Wi-Fi and he found these hot spots, and then he ran Therify for like 30 minutes, or I think it was 30 minutes or an hour. He tested, he couldn't find the hot spots anymore with his equipment. He's like, that's odd. And furthermore, the effect lasted for about a week, and then it came back. So roughly 6-7 days. And I was just like, how do you explain, like, he could still get Wi-Fi, the lights are still on, like all this stuff is still happening. Like, how do you change it for that duration? And that's when you start getting into like, it's kind of opening up a portal. I mean, if you create that much coherence and charge potential, what is it doing to the stuff we can't see all around in an area? Like, and it makes me think, and this is total speculation, so just fair warning. But when you think about sacred sites like Stonehenge or places that are just like something's going on there geomagnetically, it's like, oh, okay, well, what if Therify is actually creating this kind of like sacred space that like the more I use it? So I've experimented with running it when I'm not even on it, and it seems to have a compounding effect, meaning like I could turn it on and let it go 9 minutes on, 3 minutes off, and just let it cycle for half a day. And it seems like it like kind of starts expanding. And so there's this kind of like
Interesting.
multiplicative effect, like 1 + 1 = 3. It's like has this kind of building effect. Again, is it psychosomatic? I haven't tested it. I don't know. But based on what like Paul has told me, kind of weird experiments that he's done, and then my subjective experience, there's something kind of, I don't think we fundamentally understand going on with that particular technology.
That would make sense if we related to like our own cellular biology, because if we are training our cells how to be, you're just training the environment around us how to be,
Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
you can imagine like at least in biological terms, especially in like pharmacokinetics and dynamics, it's all about crosstalk. It's all about cross potentiation. So as you stimulate, say, growth hormone, there's stimulation of progesterone and prolactin that talks to estrogen receptors, and there's all this crosstalk. So is it like crosstalk in the environment, right? Where it's slowly just bleeding out to the rest of the system. And then from there, I don't know if this is the right wording, probably not, but I don't want to say how big of a device, but what kind of a device could you create to maybe not leave on all the time, but like to literally slowly just keep going outward, 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 right? And have like a whole city of coherence, I guess.
Yeah. And that's why I need to get Paul back to the bench.
Yeah.
Doing so. He's got some crazy ideas that I'm not at liberty to discuss, but yeah, there's some cool stuff coming, and I'm just pretty excited about it because again, I don't think we've reached our potential of what we can use for environmental remediation and where longevity could actually go. If you talk about communication, if you talk about photonic signaling, DNA, genomic changes, like there's some crazy stuff going on with electrotherapy that we're just scratching the surface on, I think.
I've only known a couple of Pauls in my life, at least from what I can discern from him, from what you're saying. And I feel bad because they never end up staying around long enough, or they will just ghost you. And I don't know if this is him. I don't want to talk bad on him at all. To be that kind of person requires you to be so different. And there's also then the safety and security aspect side of things, where if some of these technologies get out, problems kind of happen. And I would like to talk with Paul and you more about just all this stuff, because anytime I start talking with someone like a Paul, it's like all of a sudden they just drop off the face of the earth. You never hear from them again type thing. Sometimes it's voluntary, sometimes it's otherwise. And I just feel like those are the people that really can kind of, I want to say crack the code, but like they can really be the needle mover to push that next step forward. And then people like you and me can help bring that out to more people, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I believe kind of he's obviously here for a person. He's like genius level. And yeah, they're totally different. I mean, they don't interact with time in the same way. And maybe it's because they're around all these things that kind of like distort time. If you think about like what these devices actually do, and the gravitic effects and also the time effects. But yeah, no, he's on it. He's working on stuff in the background all the time now, especially since we've kind of we're dialing in and rebuilding the Vitality site, and just really kind of helping people understand better, because it is a big amorphous kind of body of knowledge that, like, if you don't really have any reference points, like I'm using some language, I don't intentionally try and use big words for like steamrolling people and trying to like sound smart. I'm just really trying to give it its due, as far as like, how do we connect this unmanifest, something that's antecedent and outside of psychophysicality, and bring it and ground it in a way where people can actually understand it. It's really challenging, but there's a lot there. And I think logically, I think metaphysics actually makes a lot of logical sense, you know, in a lot of ways.
I think a lot of things are a lot simpler than we're making them out to be. But the problem is, I think that physical side of things, we need that complication in order for us to understand it. Right. I think until you can have that better connection with the metaphysical world and just whatever that means to you, as a personal, individual, energetic being, whatever you want to call it, I think we almost need that. Like, and that's why, like, I try and learn as much as I can, because if I can't figure out how it works, it doesn't make sense to me. Whereas in reality, once you figure out how it works, you're like, duh, like how didn't I know that, you know?
And that's what I usually start things with this, but I'm just a dude from the Midwest trying to figure out how nature and reality works. I mean, that's really at the end of the day. And what I appreciate about what you do is, like, you seem to have this like photographic memory. When you're talking about like the physiology and the biology, you can remember these cascades, and like almost like you can paint a picture in your mind about how all this stuff works. And since we're using something outside of that to influence how these things work, it seems like you can connect a lot more dots than most people, as far as like the energetic side and how it interfaces and has a feedback loop with the physicality of our physiological makeup, you know?
When you even said it earlier, it's that combination of, it's not just the nutrition, the training, the supplements, the good health, the peptides, it's all the electrotherapy. It's everything we're talking about, and kind of bringing it together. And it is interesting, actually, because now all of a sudden, in like the longevity space and the biohacking space, all these things are becoming popular again, which is freaking cool. Because I would have never guessed, like 6 years ago, 10 years ago, I've never guessed that peptides would be on TV. I would never guess that there'd be these expos with 20 different kinds of ARC devices or Therapies. And regardless of if they're better or worse, I just like that they're out there. I like that people are getting more exposure to it, and it's getting more accepted. Because then before you know it, again, I realized over the past couple of years, if I could affect things at the highest level with pro athletes or a celebrity, then all of a sudden everyone else sees that they're doing that, and it becomes even more acceptable. And that's really freaking cool, because once the masses are doing it, I think that puts more research and more money back into it. And then people like Paul and you can thrive.
Well, and also we need to get rid of this like idea of like this competition, because like I'm open to talking to anybody. And I think if you look back at like, you know, Faraday's laws and what James Clerk Maxwell took, and then Tesla, and then how Dollard kind of like synthesized all of that stuff, they all work together. Like there's these bridges and these people that worked as networks, and they were all kind of learning together and kind of, you know, had different ideas, but they would pressure test each other. And that's how we developed the whole electromagnetic grid. Like the alternating current was a brilliant idea, and a lot of people don't even understand how that works and like why we still use it to this day. Like basically direct current to houses back in the day was super inefficient. And it was basically, if you think about it, you have like 10 houses on a street, and you have direct current, and you have a power source over here. Basically the first house would have the most abundant access to power, and then it would diminish over time. So that couldn't allow us to scale as a species, as far as like society is concerned, and getting electricity everywhere and have this kind of modern lifestyle. But Tesla kind of figured out like the alternating current thing, and it was just like, it's a game changer. You know, and you know how an alternating current motor works, right? Like basically it's like an inside out magnet. So if you look at a magnet like under a ferrocell, and this is a really cool device, this is just a fun thing to have for people. I won't be able to demonstrate it because the lighting's too bright, but basically it's a ferromagnetic fluid in between two pieces of optically flat glass. And you can take like a neodymium iron boron magnet and look at it, and what you'll see is like a dark black hole space type thing. And then you'll see the curvilinear lines of force. So it'll show the magnetic flux, and it looks toroidal, obviously, because that's the geometry of magnetism. You know, when we look at these kind of things, and long story short, we haven't even scratched the surface. We're going to have another like alternating current breakthrough when it comes to electrotherapy and how not only we receive energy and utilize energy from nature, but how we can actually utilize this stuff to heal our bodies and, live longer and just health span and lifespan.
So we talked a lot about a lot of different things. We talked about Therapy, we talked about the Arc, talked about Blue Shield, Sign Tamer. I think it makes the most sense now to move into the Vortex, which is it even available for sale yet or no?
It will be shortly. You and I have been talking off air for last few weeks, so you knew about it before anybody else. But yeah, it's going to be. I'm going to put it on the Blue Shield site. It's just more entry level magnetic therapy that people. It's more accessible to people, but it uses rotating magnetic fields versus an impulse kind of PEMF or a pulse electromagnetic field, and it has different properties. They kind of arrive at similar goals, and of course, the PEMF, as far as the arc is concerned, is far more powerful. However, the rotating magnetic fields are very interesting in regards to how they introduce eddy currents into the cellular membranes and work more on the redox and the nervous system side of things versus the deep tissue bone and bone marrow side that the PEMF does.
Talk about that more, right? Because you have endoplasmic reticulum stress, calcium ion flux, protein channels, the glutathione peroxidase, the superoxide dismutase catalase. Like a lot of cool things happen because that angular momentum. Like talk about that, and then also talk about the specific magnets, why there was that number of magnets, the orientation of those magnets, like all that stuff. Because when it came in, I'm looking at it, kind of not taking it apart, but just looking. Started using it. I was like, oh wow, like this is very novel, because I've tried other rotating magnetic field devices in the past, and honestly, they just break. They break after a certain amount of time, or they didn't have the right amount of magnets or the wrong amount of orientation, not the right strength. And so nothing quite lived up to the hype. So whenever you came out with that, you sent me that text. I remember the first picture of the prototype, the studies and everything. I was like, oh, this is going to be cool. So dig deeper into that, because it's super fascinating for people.
Yeah, so you'll look at it, and of course, it might be up by the time this. I don't know when this is going to go live, but when you look at it, it's basically we took like a handheld battery operated sander and we modified housing for it, because again, they break. So we're rotating at 10,000 to 40,000 rotation per minute depending on the power output. So we have some N52, so they're neodymium iron boron magnets in a specific configuration, which that's the secret sauce. And when you rotate those and apply it to the body, we're actually able to measure a field about 24 inches. So it puts a 24-inch field out when it's rotating. And so the best analogy I've come up with is, with arc, it's more like lightning. It's the same principle of like the plasma discharge, the capacitance discharge that you see in nature. The rotating magnetic field is more like the sun. So it's not polarized, meaning the E field or the electrical field or the B field, the magnetic field, isn't just one direction. With something like PMF, you get this impulse wave and then it's on and off. So that's the slew rate if you looked at it on a oscilloscope. And that's what you were talking about earlier as far as like the wave geometry. With a rotating magnetic field, it's interesting because you're rotating it and it's creating these eddy currents in the body. And when you apply it topically, it's a continual stimulation. It's not an on-off. So it's creating this rotational, and an eddy current is simply charge that rotates in the body. And it seems to have this really cool anti-inflammatory effect, but modulatory, meaning like when we're spinning off too much ROS, there's a feedback loop between calcium signaling and ROS and back and forth, right? So if one gets too far out of balance, calcium signaling increases and vice versa. So it doesn't shut down ROS because obviously that's a signaling molecule. We need that for certain processes and things to happen, but it normalizes the relationship seemingly between ROS and calcium signaling within the voltage gated calcium channels, which, as you know, calcium is a master mineral that basically does all this crazy signaling metabolically, cellularly, mitochondrially. It affects everything. And that's why, the dysregulation of that through non-native electromagnetic radiation is something we have to deal with. We have to figure out like what's actually going to hyper methylate that and actually reduce that negative impact from the EMF. So this, when we're talking about inflammation, bone density, bone healing, it will penetrate into the body, not necessarily as well as PEMF, but it will affect the bone structure and the tendons and just the healing mechanisms too. So again, I like the stuff I sent you. It's been researched since the 70s, and there's all this really cool. A lot of it is animal. There's just recent, I think 2024, there was a human study done on it, but it was done more towards like the antioxidant potential of it. So again, that normalization between reactive oxygen species and calcium signaling, it seems to have this redox balancing effect on the mitochondria. So I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if you've tested it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it had the same outcome of, stabilizing hyperpolarization as the PEMF would.
Have. And so, okay, there's a couple things, Dan. This is all kind of reaching. I'm still just getting a feel for it and kind of trying to figure out. But so multiple effects going on here. One of the effects I noticed is I almost feel like there has to be that that almost polarity-free magnetic repulsion going on. So basically levitation at the cellular level, right? Because if you look at like the KT tape, things like that, where you're lifting up, causing those adhesions, causing hemodynamics, nutrient delivery, blood flow, you get that same feeling with the vortex, which was interesting. So you're kind of getting, if you do that with, if you just kind of orient the magnets right, north and south pole, you can get that levitation effect, I'm sure, with this device, with just whatever, a normal magnet. But it seems like you're getting that at the cellular level and the dermal level. So that's pretty cool, number one. Number two, it's actually really funny because I kind of see this as being like the energetic form of passive diffusion. So normally in pharmacokinetics and dynamics, it's moving chemicals and drug molecules from areas of high concentration to low concentration. It's doing the same thing, but with energy, like sheer energy, which I thought was just fascinating because I could feel that moving throughout my body. The kids noticed it right away too, because like they would notice their hands would start to tingle if I would move it down their arms. Like it was very noticeable, which I thought was just crazy. Are those things going on? Is that how you're seeing it working? I know there's a lot going on here and I get excited, so I apologize.
No, I think that's a great breakdown. And of course, like to be even more simplex, like we have a lot of iron in our blood. We have minerals, like that. All that stuff's interacting. I think it even has an interaction. I don't think you can fully get away from mechanical manipulation, meaning like body work for fascial release, but I think it has some fascial unwinding effects as well. Of course, that's just my thoughts on it. I haven't seen like real research evidence, but it seems like, yeah, it does have these kind of like effects of just like creating space. Like think about two magnets and you phase the polarities together, and you can't even, if they're strong enough magnets, you can't even push them together. It's creating literal space between them, and it's this invisible force. It's kind of like the fascinating thing that when kids first play with magnets, it's like, wow, these just don't even go together, and you flip them around, that's implosion. That's moving towards counter space. So you get this spatial, centrifugal magnetic divergence, then you get the charge collapse. Magnets are super interesting, and they're a great analogy for everything. Like if you look at the mitochondria, that's basically like a magnet. You have an empty center, and it's stabilizing charge gradients. And then you get proton flux through one, and that cascades down the electron transport chain. So all of our trillions of cells are like little magnets. And what we're doing is stimulating it with another external magnetic field that causes the body to adapt and then reorient and restructure. So we're doing that through PEMF with an impulse, or we're doing it with a rotational magnetic field where we get constant exposure and it's kind of looping those eddy currents and kind of creating that electrical stimulation across all of these different types of tissues and densities in our body.
Going back to the fascia, right? I think there obviously has to be that interaction because we do see that interaction with the RUNX2 gene for more like osteoblast activity, so bone health, bone recovery, maybe not osteoclastic, so removal, more actually rebuilding occurs. The fibroblastic drivers for like cartilage synthesis, there's that direct driver on actual mTOR. So just actual, no, let me rephrase that. Protein synthesis. So not muscle protein synthesis, but it could be protein synthesis in an organ type and in kind of muscular tissue, kind of anywhere where protein needs to be there. It can reorient that structure. It seems to flip that switch from AMPK to mTOR dominance in that specific organ or tissue type, which is super cool. And again, I haven't played with the device long enough to see how much that lives up to the hype because they would always break. And so far, yours has been phenomenal. So if it keeps living up and it never breaks, like I feel like the whole rotating magnetic field world, it's untapped. I don't know of anyone else that has a device right now that's using it. And also comparing it to prior products, the strength wasn't there. They weren't using N52s. Like the orientation was, I don't want to say wrong because I want to be mean, but it was different, right? A different form that I wasn't a fan of. But I've used it. So I did tell you the other day, I thought it was Sunday. It was really Monday because we just changed schedules with the kids and like everything was kind of wrong. So I took the wrong mitochondrial peptides on that day. That was the first time I've taken the wrong supplement on accident in like my entire life of doing this. I always check every bottle, everything I'm doing before I do it. So I was very proud of that. And then I made my first mistake in like all this time. I'm like, of course. So either way, hyperpolarized, didn't know what was going on. It was about 2 or 3 p.m. like always. And I thought, okay, Had to have been this. That's what it was. I could use the arc, or let's see what I could do with the vortex. And I feel like it has to kind of happen top down, right? So affecting it more upstream, mitochondria in the brain to kind of fix some of those membrane based problems to kind of stabilize them. Then the rest of the body would catch up because I figured neuromuscular junction will fire, neurotransmitter will bleed downstream. You can't get the same neurotransmitter production from the gut to the brain. It doesn't work like that, right? You need more neurological action before you get peripheral action. So I did it all around my temple, around my face, down my neck, all around. And again, it took about 10 minutes. I'm not sure why, but that 10-minute interval of the arc, of structuring water, of this, it seemed to take about 8 to 10-ish minutes every single time to stabilize structures, which is, I'm not sure why that keeps popping up. It might be closer to 9, but it's in that 8 to 10 range, which, either way, it was able to clear up that overspinning effect in, again, about 10 minutes, which was really cool because it was a different effect from the arc. It wasn't like I had that same mitochondrial pressure. I didn't have that extra energetic drive, which makes sense. You're not changing millivoltages to that degree, but it did seem to stabilize the membranes, which to me, this is a whole other use for people where it's similar, it's complementary, but it's different enough. And like you said, it's entry level. Price point wise, what are you going to have it at?
It's 4,900 compared to 25,000. It's more entry level, I should say.
But that's perfect though, because people that can't afford the arc, then they can use this and it's not going to be the same, but it's still, to me, like I'd rather them get this, the Vortex, versus get a different 10th mat on the market where it's still different, doing different things compared to PEMF. But I think this is still a better entry if we're looking at, like, I'm going to say basic cellular healing, localized tissue trauma, like it's kind of doing a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I agree for sure. And we, one thing I can't talk about with the orientation is that the magnets are out of phase. So you have a magnetic field in its own respective space, but the way we structure the polarity and the geometry, it basically phase cancels. So when you spin it, it has really interesting effects.
So I know you can't talk about the specifics of that, which is, I was trying to get you to say it earlier, but I get that it's proprietary. Talk more about that specific phenomenon, because I don't think that's something a lot of people hear about all the time.
Well, phase cancellation, it kind of is in line with what we've been talking about. I mean, what we're doing is we're just trying to remove noise. So when we cancel out fields, if you have, like, again, the whole analogy of like two waveforms that are 180 degrees out of phase that cancel each other, what you're left with is a standing wave, which is like a pressure wave. If you think about it, that it's like a concentration of dielectric energy in a space, which doesn't have any physical properties and manifestation, but the body, because it's a dielectric medium, it actually interfaces with that charge potential. And that's what Tesla is super fascinated about. He's like, the transverse stuff's cool. However, let's look at this high voltage and like low current potential coming out with the violet rays and all this kind of stuff. Like, how can we apply high energy potential to the body? And it just seems to respond really well, more so than transverse electromagnetics, because transverse has a direction. It's stimulating. So when we try and use PEMF, that's like a resonator type device where they're modulating the carrier wave, you're telling the body, go in this direction now and keep doing it and keep doing it. And the body doesn't really, and it's like, whoa, I'm regulating all my own stuff in here, leave me alone. And that's how it responds. And you'll get some microcirculation. I'm not saying there's zero benefits. I'm just looking at the overarching mechanism and saying, okay, we can't really push the body to do what it doesn't want to do. What if we work with the body and allow the body the potential to actually self-regulate, but at a higher degree with more voltage and more, electromagnetic current endogenously? And that's really what we're doing with constructive wave interference. We're creating a field effect that allows the body to self-regulate more coherently and more organized way.
So with the Therapy, with the arc, and with the vortex, I know there's not going to be a hard number with this, but if you had to compare all three in terms of structuring endogenous water molecules, right? I would assume it'd kind of go top down from Therapy, arc to vortex. I know this is like, it's a really weird esoteric question that you can't really answer specifically, but just looking at how they're actually working from a coherence aspect, I'm just thinking about, honestly, other ways for people to get deuterium out of their body, or the people to get microplastics out of their body. It's all coming from a structuring ordering of water, which then once that gets structured and in the right orientation, then we can like flush, we can excrete. So then that kind of carries over to people with pathogens, parasites, the Lyme, the babesia, malarias, like it kind of bleeds into everything. Does it seem like it would work with that kind of order of devices?
You're spot on. I mean, plasma, 100% hands down, is far more efficacious. Like, you can get more structure in water more quickly with a plasma field because plasma acts as a fractal antenna. It's super stable, and depending on how it's modulated, can actually structure water way faster. You look at products like the Vitalizer Plus, for example, that we have on the Shin site, that uses a infrared magnetic field with the mineral cartridges. And that basically, you're creating a vortex in there. And that centripetal implosion actually allows for the hydrogen bonds to line up in a crystalline-like structure. So it's like a living liquid crystal, like a honeycomb. And so they're different, but you're going to get a lot more powerful effects. They both will structure water, and magnetic fields to a higher degree will actually erase the memory, which could be good, could be bad, depending on like your initial water source. Sometimes you want to strip down the memory and then rebuild it and restructure it and remineralize it after the fact. So intensity plays more of a role with magnetic fields as far as like, is it structuring the water or is it erasing the memory? However, plasma is only coherent. It's only going to create structure, and it's going to vibrate the hydrogen bonds in a particular way to create that reduction in surface area, not to the degree like the product like Crystal Energy, which will really lower the surface tension and make it like the wetting angle very similar to that of like biological fluids. But as far as an electrotherapy modality, plasma wins hands down as far as like water structuring in a relatively short amount of time.
Let's switch over to bio-ocean minerals, because you're mentioning, like, we're talking about the water a little bit. That was a newer one for me, because I looked for a while for I don't want to say the best mineral product, but basically, what was Dr. Renee's name back in the day with the dog in France?
Quintone?
Yeah, there you go. Where basically, dog has all these health ailments, removed all the blood, replaced it with basically purified ocean water, so everything kind of healed up and lived a pretty happy life. It took me a while to actually find those. And I'm like, of course, it's on Brandon's site, the bio-ocean minerals. And I dug deeper into their processes and all that kind of interesting behind the scenes work that they do, and how much it's actually filtered and how much laborious work goes into that. Talk about that product a little bit more, because I think that's another one that deserves a little bit more of a spotlight. And then also I want to get into Shen Blossom. And I know you're not trying to blow that up too big. It's more for friends and family, but because you told me about it and I'm buying things from there and everyone's going to know about it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about the bio-ocean minerals is they're the most biocompatible. If you look at it mineral for mineral in the proper ratios, it's basically almost identical to the mineral ratio you find in plasma fluid and fluids in the body. It's so there's an electrolytic aspect, but it's also got a huge amount of trace minerals. And yeah, it's been around for 100 some years. People that have wasting diseases and stuff like this, they would get on that in the early days and just totally transform. And in fact, some people that are more on the agricultural side, they would use homeopathic ocean water to homeopathically heal the soil. Not just from a mineral perspective. Of course, the salt ratios, sodium ratios are different. But basically, yeah, when you get these non-heated minerals from deep ocean source that are purified through pressure instead of heat, it maintains the structure and the balance of minerals in a way where they're super bioavailable. And I think they're just one of the best. And that's the bio-ocean come from the same lineage, the same family. I think it's the son of the family that does the Quintone minerals. So they're synonymous. What I liked about what he was doing is that he made the 1 liter bottles. And I was just like, yeah. So for families that need like bulk, that's awesome. The ampules, I think I use personally the ampules. And the only reason is that once you open that big 1 liter bottle, you kind of have to refrigerate it and use it within like 3 months. 2 months is ideal, but the ampules stay room temperature. They stay good for a really long time. And you can just pop them open, do like 1 to 3 a day. And trace minerals, obviously for every enzymatic function, you could probably go into this a lot deeper than I could as far as like everything that minerals touch, but they're super important. So the takeaway is like, these are the most bioavailable and biocoherent minerals that I've been able to find. And that's why we put it on every website that we operate, just because it's just so beneficial for so many people.
They are. I think one of the biggest things that I noticed with myself and my clients that started using it was really that NMDA receptor and glutamatergic pulling down. So usually neurochemically, if you have OCD, anxiety, any of those kind of overthinking, thought process, high stress scenario problems, it's usually too much glutamate. So you can either pull that down or push GABA up. It's going to happen indirectly, but there's also then the NMDA receptors you got to take into consideration. There's also actually the agmatine world as well, which is also a specific neurotransmitter in the brain. So there's that adaptonergic side of things as well that'll play off of the GABAergic and the glutamatergic, which actually also stimulates putrescine to give you spermidine from straight agmatine, which is super cool. But either way, going back to the bio-ocean minerals, I've seen that modulating glutamate almost better than a lot of other traditional glutamatergic compounds, like even like a Nuopept, which tends to pull down that glutamatergic load super fast. Creatine does that, other things like that. It almost works just as good, if not better, but then you don't get like the motor cortex firing of like a Nuopept where you'd be up. So using it before bed tends to get you very calm, and has a little bit more of an anxiolytic effect. So if you don't want to take like the Cell-Ank or like an Edifox and some more GABA A in the brain, like the minerals, as basic as they sound, in the right ratios, seem to have more pulling down of glutamate. So before sleep, I really like that. And then for me personally, I work out super early in the morning. So immediately post-workout, that's the first thing I drink, shower, kind of get all cleaned up, and then I have my post-workout meal. And right away, I'll always get like that. It's like a 30-minute post-workout hemodynamic flux where I would just get a full body pump for about 30 minutes after the training session.
Nice.
And my sessions are pretty stupid now. It's like everything. So it's my longevity work, mobility, strength, hypertrophy. I'm trying to, so like if I'm ever getting chased by a dinosaur, I can carry all my kids. I can take care of everyone, and like nothing's going to catch me. Like that's how I think. I want to be able to do it all at the same time. So the full body gets a pump. But either way, the minerals in those settings, they've been phenomenal for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and even if you are using those compounds, they'll just work better. You know what I mean? With the proper mineral balance in the bloodstream, it's phenomenal. I mean, it goes back to just like core. There's like fundamental substrate stuff, and then there's like therapeutic and medicinal. It kind of goes back to the old school TCM stuff where you have tonic herbs and tonics that you're eating it for like next week, next month, next year, and they have a cumulative regulatory effect versus like medicinal herbs where you stay on it for a specific outcome, and then you get off them when you don't need them, and you've created a balance or something of that nature, you know?
Speaking of, the green MSM, the Earth Dragon, and the Nanuki throat spray.
Naniku. Yeah.
How do you pronounce it?
Naniku. It's
Naniku.
for garlic. Yeah.
Naniku. Talk about those three, because I think I haven't tried everything on your site. I'm slowly making my way through, but those are the ones that I was just kind of pulled towards, and they kind of fit the bill for what I needed at that time. And they're kind of staples now for me. So talk a little bit about those three products.
Well, sulfur is huge. It's really hard to get in our diet from the cooking aspect, from just mineral depletion as well. But 53% of urine weight is sulfur, like organic sulfur. So MSM stands for methylsulfonomethane. It's an oxidized form of DMSO, or dimethyl sulfoxide. And basically, if you look at most of the big brands, the big labs, you know, like the Opti MSM, it's a patented form. It's a 5 times or 6 times distilled MSM. You know, it's phenomenal. Like we just create one that's made out of plants. So 99.9%, probably I could safely say 100% of MSM besides ours is manufactured as a byproduct of the petroleum industry and the paper milling industry, which is fine. You know, they distill it. It sounds gross on the surface, but you know, they distill it and purify it in a way where it's like super therapeutic, and sulfur just does so many things. It's known as a beauty mineral for collagen cross-linking, you know, inflammation, intracellular, like glutathione, superoxide dismutase, all our antioxidant systems, but also our repair mechanisms. And it acts like PEMF in a sense where it basically makes the cell membranes more permeable. So more nutrients in, more waste out, more redox potential, all that good stuff. We just make ours out of like bamboo pith and juniper vine and like actual plants that we kind of make. In the Japanese lineage, it's kind of like the old wood pulp tonic. So we make a lye and ash, and it's electrically charged. This is one thing that people don't understand, why it's kind of dangerous to manufacture and why it has to be like very strict control processes, is that when you're actually making this stuff and you're going through the heating and cooling process and like distilling it down and purifying the sulfur, it like you could feel a static charge in the room. It's wild. Like you don't want to like light a match in there or something like that. It's just like the gases and all this kind of stuff. But basically, like, yeah, it's a fundamental mineral. I mean, we want all the trace minerals from the biocean minerals, but the sulfur compounds, when you're talking about like heavy hydrogen, I think moving forward from a natural, like right now, we only have the ability to distill it out. You know, you have to do multiple distillations of water to kind of get the heavy hydrogen out of the water. But I think these garlics, these aloes, and some elements of the monoatomic minerals, along with, you know, sulfur compounds, are going to be kind of, I think, a recipe for, you know, how we can accelerate heavy hydrogen out of our system moving forward into the future. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. And then the Earth Dragon is more of a, we call it Earth Dragon, like it's an earthworm formula. There's more herbs in it than that. There's supportive cast, but that's like the kind of main player in that formula. And the lumbricanase has been isolated and used in enzyme formulas for a long time. But when you get it from its natural source, we look at So we don't just look at the chemistry from a TCM perspective. We look at the energetic signatures. There's a doctrine of signatures, kind of like a blueberry looks like an eye, and it happens to have antioxidants that are specific for the rods and the cones and the retinal function. And, you look at a walnut and it looks like a brain. So it has like good, healthy, like stuff for the brain and is from a nutrition perspective. And when we look at the Earth Dragon, it's a great example of soft overcoming hard. Like if we look at it from a Taoist lens, like it can aerate soil, like heavy clay, dense soil where nothing will grow. You get earthworms in there and it just dredges it out and makes it more fertile for all life to like thrive. So when we look at it from dredging the meridians and the gastrointestinal tract and all this kind of stuff, it does some amazing things for the GI tract. As when we're talking about leaky gut, or if we have like yeast overgrowth or any of this kind of stuff, there's this enzymatic process, but there's also this energetic process that happens, it's pretty profound, and it actually tastes quite good. When you make a little tea out of it, you pour like a quarter teaspoon into a little bit of hot water and you drink it, you can just kind of like feel the energetics first. And that's largely a byproduct of how we do our traditional Japanese preparations. Not every earthworm product will really feel like that. And it's really a low and slow method that, a lot of labs, they prioritize time and efficiency, which we do it more traditional where it's low and slow, the micro fermentations, the blending, the synergy of the ingredients versus any ingredient being dominant. That has a multiplicative effect in the body. And that's a really great product for just kind of like, immune function, strength, but also, circulation and inflammation. And, we can take systemic enzymes, we can do all this other stuff too, but this is a great layer to add in as far as an herbal supplement to kind of help with those processes. And then I think you mentioned the Niku. That's kind of been a fan favorite for a long time. It was one of our first, we had the Adapt product and the Protect product. Those were the two originals. And the Niku is one that just like, it kind of shows you that herbalism works. You take one or two sprays of that and it opens up the sinuses. If you have any kind of strep throat conditions, it'll kind of numb that out. And it's really cool balance in the sense that you can actually use it. It's potent enough to be used every 45 minutes or so, or on the hour if you have acute cold flu or something like that. But you can use it as a daily tonic to kind of build up the immune system. And from a TCM perspective, it's known to clear the exterior. So when you look at the skin, which is where our Wei Qi is stored, Wei Qi is like a defensive or immune Qi from that kind of thought, from that system. Our skin and our lungs are the most exposed to the external environment. And when, the external environment changes through the seasons, this is why it's good to cleanse kind of seasonally, because we need to adapt our body to what's coming in. The air becomes drier or more humid. People get sick during the cold and flu season because of like the energetics. Their body's disproportionately imbalanced. And that's, again, from a traditional perspective, that's why we want to kind of eat seasonally. You wouldn't be eating iceberg lettuce in the middle of winter in certain climates. It's not going to balance the internal and external environment to what's happening in the environment. But the Protect is like well-rounded in the sense that you got protection from pathogens, microbes, all this kind of stuff. But it's also the aged garlic and the fermented garlics. They really help with protection of the cardiovascular system and help to kind of like stabilize plaques in the cardiovascular system. But then it has, again, being a Swiss Army knife, it's going to have all other modalities, even topically. So if you have a histamine reaction, like a bug bite or something topically, you can spray it on topically and rub it in. We've used it on Q-tips in our daughter's ears when they have like kind of ear stuff going on, and you can kind of like move it in there and it just works wonders. So that's kind of like not only a staple for the medicine cabinet, but just for travel. It's like, it's an essential in my carry.
That's right. So I haven't, knock on wood, I haven't gotten sick in like a year and a half. And I've been traveling more than ever over this past year. And part of it was that throat spray. So when I get to the airport, whenever I land, when I go to meet someone new, I'll use a couple sprays per day whenever I'm traveling. And then even here, before I go to walk outside, I'll just do one spray, just for that adaptation mechanism you were talking about. It definitely wakes you up. Was it the wasabi in there, right? That little bit of sting.
Yeah, there's wasabi, there's garlic, there's clove, there's basically like a host of different things. So anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antifungal, like compounds. But yeah, the synergy is really where it gets you. But the wasabi actually drives it up. And we actually have 3 different styles. So we have the mint, which is kind of like the go-to. If you had to pick one of them, that's kind of everybody's favorite. It really opens up the sinuses. But then we have the garlic thyme. So the thyme has a kind of a numbing and antiseptic effect. So if you have more of like upper respiratory stuff or sore throat or strep throat or something like that, it really kind of helps with the pain aspect. And then the turmeric, we kind of did that one. You'll find if anybody plays with it, it's more gentle, but it's more for circulatory protection. So it has immune functions obviously, but it's more geared towards being more palatable for children or people that are more sensitive. Because again, it's super potent. So it's not like dumbed down or diluted by any means, but what it does is it's more palatable and tastes really good. But it also works more on the cardiovascular levels.
So what about, so you have a lot of different products on top of those. If you had to pick one, like just for your personal favorites, like outside of those three, what's like that one go-to you have every day more consistently, or you just kind of like, that's just your preferred one?
Well, the real ginseng is probably definitely a go-to. The wild reishi is another one. So immune modulation, but it's really interesting. I just did an in-person with our mutual friend Hunter Williams, and I had him try some of the capsule on camera, because a lot of people just take capsules, which is great. You'll get the benefits and all that kind of stuff. But the way we process this and do the micro fermentation and break it down by hand, and this wild reishi that's hand harvested, it will affect you emotionally almost immediately. Meaning, like, you take it under your tongue and you just feel super chill. It's like you almost go parasympathetic right away. It's really noticeable. So, gosh, I mean, I have so many things that I cycle through them. I mean, there's a reason that ginseng is, several times its weight in gold, as far as its value. And we use like mature roots. So a lot of people have had ginseng that are like immature, like 14, 15-year-old. And funny enough, that ginseng, once it goes through its life cycle and it hits about the teenage range, it produces this specific enzyme that they call it, its nickname is like an immortality enzyme. So basically it will live for hundreds of years, kind of like an olive tree, unless it petrifies in the ground, which it doesn't rot, and or it gets eaten by an animal or a human. It basically, on the doctrine of signatures level, it looks like an entire body. So if you talk about putting gold caps on your telomeres, it's just super protective as far as like passing down cellular information. But on the lung function, the athletic endurance, all of that kind of stuff, like real ginseng is, most people haven't really had it, especially in a traditional sake extract, which is kind of more of a living alcohol, meaning it has prebiotic, probiotic elements to it. And it's low and slow over like years of like, extraction. It's not just like months under high pressure in a closed vacuum system, which a lot of extracts are these days. And then they'll claim like, 50-year-old roots, or, these older, like more senior citizen roots. But what they'll do is they'll put like one in a batch of like a bunch of younger ones, and then create a huge batch out of that and call it 50 years. So there's a little bit of like that going on in the industry. But what I like about these herbs is they speak for themselves. I don't really have to talk about it. It's for the discerning connoisseur, people that have played with herbs, played with dietary supplements in the past. That's why I went out on my own and did this project. It's not scalable. I can only get so much of this stuff a year. It's not, from a business perspective, people wouldn't really like go after it in the sense, because you can only do so much. But I'm more about like quality and like than quantity. And like, this is stuff that I've been blessed and honored to be part of. Literally, it's a closed supply chain. It's one of the few that exists, meaning we have a network of families in Japan that, that have been doing some of the stuff like with the miso fermentation all the way to the wild crafting and all this kind of stuff. It's been done for generations, and it's hard to find this stuff outside of Japan unless you like have real connections. And most people are just making dietary supplements. They're going to the same labs, and they're private labeling or white labeling or turnkey products, and they're just marketing it different with different ratios. And, it's like becomes like factory farmed food. It's just like hyper processed. There's no enzymatic integrity. The volatile oils are usually degraded. So we do focus on full spectrum extracts, where you get the alcohol soluble nutrients, the fat soluble nutrients, and the water soluble nutrients, and in the proper ratio, broken down so they're bioavailable and maintain their energetic coherence. And what I mean by that is, I've harvested tons of wild herbs. Like I used to do wild food foraging and stuff, and like primitive skills. I was into that for a number of years. And when you harvest wild reishi, like which grows in our area, off the tree, and you bring it in your house, the whole house like just has this smell, and you feel it. You feel more relaxed. You boil it on the stove. All of those volatile oils are kind of like evaporating into the air, and it's just an experience you can't describe to people unless they've actually experienced it. And then you drink that fresh tea from something wild, has a totally different effect. And in supplement form, this is the closest you can get to that real, fresh, living feeling of harvesting something out of nature yourself and consuming it.
I haven't tried your reishi yet, so I'm going to buy it and try the capsules and pop it open under the tongue, because that sounds very interesting. Because I know mechanistically what's going on, but I don't think I've ever actually had real reishi. Because there's some decent products out there, but I'd consider it very different from what Shen Blossom produces, right? Because like there are certain reishi products that are good on like the nootropic side of things, but in terms of like the whole body cellular energetic changes, healing, everything else it's doing, I think it gets lost. So it is very specific for one thing, but you lost the elements of everything that has the potential to do. And I think that's where like Shen Blossom really shines. It's really the entirety of what it has to offer. So I want to try that for sure.
I mean, we're constantly making food products and herbal products. I'm always experimenting with stuff. Like my friend just makes some really awesome formulations, and he's like my connection to the Japanese folks over there. So we got. I just can't keep up. Like the bandwidth is kind of, but we're working on getting new herbal formulations, food formulations. Yeah, Paul, we got some really cool stuff. I wish I could talk about. I'm just kind of like being patient. So yeah,
I'll be your first beta tester, client, whatever. So keep me updated on those. I won't say anything.
Sure. For sure. And, I just think developing out the electrotherapy side to take it to the next level where one of the things that Paul's working on in particular, I think it's going to be as game changing as alternating current was for, direct current energy back in, the early 1900s. I just think we've got some really cool stuff on the horizon. So yeah, just continuously staying open-minded, learning, and just really trying to help the industry evolve to where it's just like less of this versus that, but it's like, how can we work together to solve this elephant in the room, which is like, we're getting hammered with electromagnetic radiation, and nobody's really, at least 10 years or so ago when I started this, it's like nobody was talking about it. We were talking about all this other health optimization stuff, and everybody knew about the EMF problem, but I think there's a lot more awareness around it now. So I'm going to continue to that. And I'm working on an EMF masterclass for newbies, the basic. And then I'm going to go into like some kind of deeper concepts too. So it's going to be probably a 2-part series at this point.
That's going to be cool. And where you're going to have that at?
Online somewhere. Yeah. I don't really have a podcast or a YouTube channel. I mean, I have a minor one, but I just love doing this stuff that's interactive with people like you that are just truly inquisitive and care about like, I want to learn what's really going on. And if we can even know that to the fullest extent, it's possible that we can't. But however, it allows for that potentiality that where we can actually move forward and grow and learn and change. And, really, I think all problems have solutions in nature. I mean, nature is intelligent and it's self-correcting, self-organized system. And, we have solutions, I think. And we just need to kind of like, be transparent about what those are and like, educate people on how to take care of their health and wellness.
So I know you don't like to travel that much, but on the horizon, are there any expos, events, or anything like that you're going to be at or Paul's going to be at?
I don't have any plans. Paul will be at the Tesla Tech conference in, I think, August. So that's one. He's going to have a Therapy there. If anybody wants to go check it out in person, that's going to be a great conference. It's more on the tech side and less like health biohacker side, but it's a cool place to go to see kind of what's cutting edge in the electrotherapy space.
It's going to be cool then. So, okay, where to find everything? I know we talked about Blue Shield, Shen Blossom. I'll put all the links down below, but just say it so people can hear if they're not watching the video.
Yeah, you can, for the EMF stuff, you can go to blueshield.com, and that's Blue Shield with no E, BLU shield.com. And then for the Japanese traditional preparations, herbs, foods, nutrition, that's Shen Blossom, SHEN, blossom like flower blossom. You can find ARC there too, the PEMF site. We kind of coalesce that all into like one website. And then for Therapy and cold plasma technology and kind of really authentic Tesla style tech, Vitality, like the phi ratio, PHI, vitality.com.
And then Vortex is going to be at Shen Blossom?
That might be all over the place. So Shen Blossom and Blue Shield, we're going to put it on both of those sites.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, the one Vitality shirt you sent me was like a 1X or a 2X. I put it on because I was going to take a picture to send you. Like, yay, like thumbs up. And it looked like a baby shirt on me. Lindsay's like, you can't send that picture. You can't take that picture.
Did you Hulk it where you tore it when you like flexed and like...
I tore it on accident. Yeah, I was like, okay. I felt kind of bad because it was such nice material and I wanted to wear it to like send you a picture. I was like, okay, can't really send that.
No, all good, man. Yeah. Well, with those biceps, dude, I can't imagine you fit in much.
Picking up all the kids and eating all the food, man.
Yeah.
But we're going to call it on this episode for today, guys. Links will be down in the description box below. I do have discount codes too, so I'll throw all that kind of fun stuff down there. But dude, thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad we can kind of make this happen. And it was a blast. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks, Alex.